Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Senate Democrats Ask Me Anything. You're going to get 4 hours of Democratic senators. We're trying to get just about every senator to participate, and you can ask them anything. And we are here to show what's going on with this horrible bill. Trump calls it a big, beautiful bill. Let me tell you, it is ugly. And the closer you get, the uglier it looks. It is so nasty. It is so cruel. It is so mean. It's the largest cut in healthcare that we have ever seen. It cuts Medicaid back dramatically. It cuts ACA back dramatically. It makes private insurance such that even if you don't have Medicaid or Medicare or ACA, your rates are going to go way up. It's going to cause so many hospitals to lay off hundreds of thousands of people, hardworking people who need the jobs. If you're in a rural area, the likelihood is your hospital will shut down. Now, Donald Trump is being just a fucking liar about this. He says it won't cut anyone's benefits. That's a lie. He said it won't close any hospitals. He said that's a lie. He said that it's just going after fraud and abuse. Bull. Ask somebody who is losing their health care why they're part of fraud and abuse. Ask the senior citizen who can't pay for their prescription drugs why that's part of fraud and abuse on their part. It isn't. And he is so full of it on fraud and abuse and going after fraud and abuse that they just pardoned a big nursing home operator who had years sentence in jail because he ripped off his workers. That's fraud and abuse, Mr. President. That's who you should go after, not pardoning the guy and going after working people. And it's not just bad on healthcare, as bad as that is. And by the way, we just learned it's also going to make Medicare, senior citizens on Medicare, it's going to make that more expensive and more difficult as well. So wherever you look at healthcare, it is slashing it. People will have less healthcare, and that's dramatic. Another thing it does, most Americans, 80%, believe we should feed hungry children and other people, senior citizens who need food help, veterans who've just come back and need food help. This cuts more money out of food, helping feed hungry people. It's called SNAP, the program, than any bill ever has. How the hell do you take food out of a kid's mouth? And finally, one of the other things it does, we've transformed America so that we're moving to clean energy, to wind and solar. The bill eliminates all that because the fossil fuel industry has the Republican senators and Donald Trump in their vice grip. And they eliminate, here we say we need a lot more energy because of all the AI and everything else, and yet they're cutting off the cheapest, cleanest form of energy we got, which is solar, all because the fossil fuel industry knows that clean energy is the future and they want to kill it. So this is one big ugly bill. And you know why they're doing it? Makes it even uglier. Tax breaks for billionaires. They're few, this little small group, these billionaire buddies of Donald Trump, they want to pay less taxes. Imagine taking food out of babies and children's needs, a child who's hungry can't learn, cutting health care for veterans, for senior citizens, for little people. It's just terrible, terrible, terrible for the taxpayers. So what we call this bill, it's a betrayal. Everything Donald Trump said in the campaign, he's betraying the working families of America just to help the billionaires. So my first question is from Susan Lambert's audience, a creator based here in DC. Hi, Suzanne. Thanks for sending in the question. The question is this: am I voting for the big ugly bill? NFW, as they say in Brooklyn, no fucking way. I am not voting for this bill. I wouldn't. It's one of the worst bills I have ever seen. And what are Democrats doing to stop this bill? We are pulling out all the stops. We are using every tool in the toolbox to try and stop this bill. We are obviously telling our Republican colleagues how bad it is, but that's not going to do it. Here's what's going to do it. Abe Lincoln, he said, public sentiment is everything. So we are all over the place in Republican states, in Republican districts, letting the public know how bad this is. Of the 7 Republican congressional districts in my state, where Republicans are in charge, I've been in all 6 talking about how bad the Medicaid cuts are, talking about how their hospitals will close, talking about how the average citizen is going to pay $500 to $1,000 more on their energy bill, on their heating bills, because of what Trump has done. We had a great rally on Thursday about what they're doing on clean energy. And the labor union guys all showed up, carpenters and laborers and pipe fitters and everybody else, because this bill is going to throw them out of work. We estimate that millions of people are going to lose their jobs. And we're letting people know, you work in a hospital, you might lose your job. You work for a new clean energy company, you might lose your job. And we're letting people know how bad this is for them. You're not going to get the kind of food help that you need to feed kids. And that's going to hurt our farmers. I see Senator Klobuchar walked in. She's one of our experts on farmers, coming from what she calls Minnesota. And so we're fighting every step of the way. We're letting the public know. The calls are pouring in. And we'd say to you, our audience, call your senators, call your congressmen, tell them how ugly this bill is. Tell them how mean this bill is. Tell him we do not want to see the Republicans and Trump betray America just to help a few billionaires. We can stop this bill. And if you live in a state with just Democratic senators, I'll bet you got friends, relatives, you know who, business associates who are in other states, Republican states. Make sure they call, make sure they write, make sure they picket, make sure they protest. Public sentiment is everything. The public, the more they learn about this bill, the more they hate it. Let them know, let their senators know. Let's beat this monstrosity. Up next is Senator Klobuchar, who is appropriately dressed in green. I said she'd talk about farmers.
All right, thanks, Chuck.
Thank you, Amy.
Appreciate it. Okay. Very good. So the first question from Jessica Craven, thanks Jessica, is here's a question about Medicare. What Medicaid services are Republicans looking to cut? So just to step back a little bit, we are living at a moment in time where we've gotten through the pandemic. Our economy, in my mind, was getting better, and it showed that jobs, especially for young people, were going up. And then what happens is Trump comes in, and instead of working on the actual problems we have in front of us, which are things like housing, and we don't have enough childcare, and we need to bring healthcare costs down. He comes out, first of all, with these tariffs, which have been a disaster. And then second of all, he comes out with this big, beautiful betrayal, is what I call it, because it's a betrayal of the American people. So there's two things. One, you mentioned Medicare, and one, you mentioned Medicaid. Both things are in peril and are being cut by this latest budget. And let me explain why it's different things for different reasons for different things. The first thing is Medicaid is very clear. From the very beginning, no matter what Donald Trump said, they have said that they're going to be cutting Medicaid in the bill. You look at the numbers and it shows that they cut Medicaid. There's no other way to get to their numbers without cutting Medicaid. And as you know, Medicaid is what people use, our seniors, when they're in assisted living. Half of them are on Medicaid. When my dad was in assisted living at the end of his life, I knew the exact moment he was going to run out of his savings. He'd been married, 3 times. All right. And so there wasn't a lot of savings left. And so I knew when that was going to happen. And then he would be moved. I had a plan of where I was going to bring him, Catholic Charities, that took Medicaid. And he ended up dying just shortly before that. But so many families know what I mean. Kids, grandkids, who are looking out for their loved ones. Then you have kids with disabilities that depend on Medicaid. And you have a number of people that need Medicaid for their health care. Secondly, this bill, as its proposed numbers just came out today, are going to kick 16 million Americans off health care. Second, you asked about Medicare, which is different. And the reason this is triggered is because the numbers are so bad that it's going to involve some cuts to Medicare now. They're focused on rural hospitals and those kinds of things. So Those are the two kinds of things where we're seeing the cuts. And Medicaid has been out there for a while. The Medicare is relatively new because of the way they've done this. We believe there's going to be cuts to Medicare that'll primarily hurt hospitals who are already really operating on a small margin. Okay, next question. This is from Tammy on Instagram. Can you talk about what this will mean for SNAP? So SNAP is a food assistance program that helps people a lot of times temporarily when they're out of work or when they need some extra help. They may be working. A lot of them are working, but they may have a kid, 2 kids, 3 kids, and they don't have enough money to afford their groceries. SNAP helps primarily kids, people with kids, veterans, and seniors. So what they've done here is unbelievable. They've cut nearly $300 billion, that's billion dollars from SNAP in order to finance these tax cuts for the wealthy on the backs of the people that need it the most. I visited a bunch of food shelves recently in Minnesota, especially in rural areas where there's a high poverty rates in a lot of parts of our country. And I've also gone to grocery stores. So here's the thing to know about their SNAP cuts. Number one, and this is something that I think people don't really expect, but they are shifting over a bunch of money to the states. And they're saying, oh, hey, that's fine. The states will be able to pay for it. That is not fine at all. Half of these cuts, over half of the cuts, are shifts to states. 41 of our 50 states have balanced budgets amendments. So they're not going to be able to afford it. They're either going to have to cut people's food, groceries, or they're going to have to cut out law enforcement, or they're going to have to cut out some of their state mental health care or hospitals. Here's what they've said themselves. Kansas, state of Kansas, pretty much a red state, but has a Democratic governor, Laura Kelly. That state is going to have to shoulder $100 million extra. And she just says, we don't have the money. North Carolina, Governor Josh Stein, again, a Democratic governor in what is considered a red state. But we have had Democratic senators from there. And he says our state will be forced into perilous budget decisions. Should North Carolinians lose access to food, or should we get rid of other essential services? $580 million shifted over to North Carolina under this sleight of hand, ridiculous budget plan. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, $170 million would go on his state budget. It's going to leave more of our kids and seniors going hungry. So that's what we're dealing with. The second thing is, if anyone's ever traveled in rural America, a lot of times there's just one grocery store in town. A lot of those grocery store customers, it can range anywhere from 5 to 40%, are on SNAP. And so this will, in stores that can hardly operate with a thin margin, this is going to mean getting rid of some of the grocery stores. And this is why so many of the grocery stores have been standing up against these cuts. Third thing is grocery prices. As you all know, since Donald Trump got into office, costs are up, chaos is up, corruption is up. And it's gotten more expensive for people to be able to buy food. And yet you'll cut the food assistance that people need to be able to buy the food. So that's why this is a huge part of this nightmares budget, which, as you know, as Elon Musk so nicely points out, is increasing the debt deficit by $3 trillion. Big problem. But at the same time, it's doing these tax cuts for the wealthy. That's what adds to the deficit on the backs of people that can't afford it. Next question, access to healthy food. So that's what a lot of this program is about, right? It's about being able to go into a grocery store. I was just in Coburn's grocery store in rural Minnesota the other day, and being able to buy apples, being able to buy lettuce, being able to buy some healthy food. Because if you have no money to buy food at all, well, what do? You buy just the cheapest packaged food that you can possibly get, or maybe what you are able to pick up at a small food shelf or something like that. And while you may get the calories, you don't get the healthy food, and it actually exacerbates our health problem and the like. And that's why we've worked so hard to make sure dairy's available and protein's available, and make sure fruits and vegetables are available, and expand our farm programs to create incentives for what we weirdly call specialty crops, but they're really everything you eat, for some of our smaller farmers, so they have some of the same access to a safety net that other farmers have always had. So that's one way we do it. The other way is with school lunches. And of course, the third way is with SNAP that I just mentioned. And school lunches are really important as well. So many of these cuts with Medicaid, with the cuts that we're seeing when it comes to the SNAP program are really going to hit kids. And I just cannot say how ridiculous this budget is. Instead of tackling the debt, instead of doing something about that, and by the way, to do that, you would actually take maybe people making over $400,000 a year, and you would say, okay, we're going to make some changes on their taxes. We're going to actually make them pay more. Big corporations, that tax rate went so far down during the last Trump tax cuts. We could bring it up just even a few points, and each point is $150 billion in 10 years. So if they went up to 26% or something like that, that alone combined could give you something like $1 trillion, where you could reduce the deficit, or you could put it into things like housing or childcare. People say that a budget is about your values. Well, this budget values the wealthy at the expense of everyone else. Okay, are there more questions? Any question you want to ask? Okay, let's see. We have another one coming in, and I thought this was an interesting one because we're starting to hear from a lot of the House Republicans that they actually didn't read what they voted on. So the big, beautiful bill, which is actually the big, beautiful betrayal, it turns out they actually didn't know what was in it. So how do I know? Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she actually said, full transparency, I did not know about this section, and I would have voted no if I known it was in there. That's on the state AI moratorium. It says you can't do anything more on AI. Representative Mike Flood on the provision limiting the power of the judges to hold people in contempt. He said, of Nebraska, he said, this provision was unknown to me when I voted for the bill. So that was the question we got from Dixie on Facebook. And that was, wait a minute, how when you're dealing with people's health care, 16 million people who are going to lose their health care, millions of people, 4 million people who are going to not be able to access food assistance. How come you're saying you didn't even read the bill and you didn't know? Well, you know what happened at the very end. They're trying to get votes, and the president's calling them to support the big, beautiful bill. And so what happens? They end up voting for something they don't even know what's in it. It's absurd at this moment when there have been a lot of lobbying on these AI provisions, and there isn't federal law yet on AI at all, to say no state can do one thing. When in fact you have a state like Tennessee with Republicans in charge that actually passed this Elvis bill that says you have control over your own image and your own voice, Nashville, in that state. That's actually something we're trying to do on the federal level, a bipartisan bill that 4 of us are doing, but that hasn't passed yet. So why would you get rid of every state's AI regulation until then? How come some of these Republicans who have been talking about the debt and the deficit and spending and all this, how come they supported something that adds $3 trillion to our nation's debt? Well, now we find out they didn't even read it. Greg on Facebook, what will the tax impacts be if this bill fails and the 2017 tax cuts expire? So the issue here is, and the reason we'd like to get a bipartisan bill passed, is that there were some things in there that you'd want to keep, right? You want to keep some of the tax cuts for, in fact, a lot of them for the people making under $400,000 a year. You want to keep some of the incentives in place that have been around for a while, and do something about the R&D tax credit. From my position, I think that's a good thing. There's a number of tax provisions in there that you would want to keep on. But what they're talking about doing, and let's be really clear about this, they're not just keeping those on, they're doing extra things to help the wealthiest, so that the wealthiest are going to get like a $250,000 tax cut. Think about what that would mean for regular people. So that's the problem. You don't want everything to expire, but they're actually taking the worst of it, keeping that in place, the stuff that created this big income inequality. And now, so they're doing that. And now they are also, after creating this big income inequality, they are also saying, okay, we're going to make it even worse. We're going to give incentives for the wealthiest to get even more. And not only that, they're tucking in there some crazy stuff like, oh, judges can't do these national injunctions when something's illegal, or, oh, we're not going to do any state AI regulation. They're just picking things out that they think would be helpful to them. So that's why this whole thing is such a big, beautiful betrayal. So many people voted for Donald Trump that thought, oh, I'm going to get, I'm worried about inflation, legit concern. And I think he's going to do something about it. Or my rent's too high and I think he's going to do something about housing, legit thought. But they're doing the opposite. They're actually making the debt worse, which is really bad for you and your kids, because that results in all kinds of problems with the economy. And at the same time, they're not working on the things that matter to you. And that's why this thing is such a betrayal, and why I'm not surprised they're now saying, oh, I actually didn't read it when I voted for it. Well, the Senate now has a chance to correct that. All we need is 4 Republican senators to stand up and say, this is not a big, beautiful bill. We need to make severe changes to it. Anna from Instagram, how long would the Republican budget be in effect if it passed? Well, the last one was like a 10-year, it was a 10-year tax thing, right? Going up, you can see we did those last ones were the 2017 Trump tax bill, in which that's one where the corporate tax rate went so far down and we lost like $1 trillion where we could have been with even a compromise. So that's the kind of numbers that we're dealing with here. It's usually in a 10-year phase. Now they could do whatever they want with it. But the point is that our big concern right now is that we keep getting people, and that means all of you, to post on this, to talk to your friends about it, talk to people who aren't your friends, but you think might care about it. If they care about what happens to Medicaid, if they care about what happens when it comes to the economy right now, that so many of the young people that are on this right now are going to inherit, then they've got to do something about it, because we all know what's going on here, right? I said 4 Republicans. That's because if it's just 3 Republicans and it's tied and JD Vance can do the president's bidding. So we need 4 Republicans to stand up. We have a number of them already saying that they think that the Medicaid cuts are immoral. Those are their words. And so we know we have a chance of winning this, or at least getting them to make major changes, but we can't do it without all of you. Us just going around and giving floor speeches and talking to an empty room and bugging them about it and calling them, we do all those things. We push them to have to vote on things. We do all kinds of things. But to really win, to win for all of you, you have got to contact them. You've got to contact Republican senators and even Republican House members, because it's eventually going to go back to them. But right now I would focus on Republican senators and tell them what you think about this bill. That's how democracy works. That's your power. And you have more power collectively than we do right now in this room. So we need you, despite this beautiful room and every place we are. If you make your voices heard, and we've seen this happen time and time again. Remember Affordable Care Act when it was going to be repealed, but John McCain went in there and voted no and surprised everyone? That's because people from Arizona had spoken out, and it made a difference. You think about all the progress we've made over the last few years and things that we have gotten done. That's because all of you, because you spoke out. So I'm a big believer in democracy, and it starts right here with all of you on your platforms. So thank you very much. So I've got to go to the floor. I'm actually going to give a speech on the importance of public radio and public TV. Always fun to watch. So I'm going to go do that. And I just did one yesterday about how C-SPAN should be available on all the platforms, like YouTube and like Hulu, so that more and more people and your friends can get engaged. So I'm just into transparency and democracy, because I think that's how America wins. So thanks a lot for having me. And the next senator, I could filibuster, but they're going to be here in a few minutes. So look forward to hearing what they have to say. But I just want to thank you guys. I'm taking my coffee, but under the rules, you can't bring it on the Senate floor. You can just have water or milk. Why don't you guys think about that for a while? See you later.
Hi, everyone. I'm Senator Tina Smith, and we are back with the questions, and I'm really excited to help answer these questions. So here is...
Hey, Tina, thank you for being here.
Hey, look, we got the leader here,
We got
Senator
the great
Schumer.
Tina Smith. We know how much this bill is betraying America. We know how ugly it is, and we're going to let everybody know, right?
That's right. That's right. So we're really grateful to have all of you asking these questions. And here's the first question that I'm going
Give
to
him hell,
answer.
baby. Give him hell.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you. Okay. Sawyer Hackett asked his audience what they'd like us to answer. And so here's the question that we have. The question is, have heard that the Republican tax bill will raise prices. If it is passed, how much will it cost me? So this is a great question because what we know from bipartisan, nonpartisan experts is that what this bill will do is it will raise costs for pretty much most middle class and working class families. Your costs are going to go up. And what's going to happen is that the tax breaks are going to go primarily to the very wealthiest Americans and big corporations. So that is the gist of everything that's going to happen here. What does that mean in real time? Your healthcare premiums could go up if you buy your insurance on the healthcare exchanges. Your energy costs are going to go up because they are repealing all of the tax credits that help bring renewable energy online, clean energy online, and that is boosting energy supply. And when they take that all away, everybody knows that your energy costs are going to go up. If you count on SNAP, which is the biggest anti-hunger program in this country, you are going to lose your ability to help pay for your groceries. So your grocery costs are going to go up. And by the way, this is not even counting what impact the Trump tariffs are having on raising costs of everything from beer to food to pretty much everything that you buy. So long story short is that your costs are going to go up and your taxes are almost certainly not going to be improved by this bill if you're just a regular person. Okay, so here is a question from Linda on Facebook. And the question is, please discuss the sneaky provisions in this bill that empower Trump to act as king. So this is another really great question because you know the way our government is supposed to work is Congress passes the laws and the president is supposed to implement the laws. But what's going on here is that Trump is basically circumventing all of your elected representatives in order to be able to make all those decisions and do everything that he wants to do all by himself. And there are a lot of examples of that, but here's one really big one, is that they are going to be dramatically raising the federal debt. And what that means is that your costs are going to go up. Your borrowing costs are going to go up. The amount of money that you have to pay to borrow money for a car or to get a mortgage on a house, all of those costs are going to go up. And Moody's, which is one of the countries, they set the credit ratings for the United States of America. They have lowered the credit rating for the United States of America. I think it's like the first time in 100 years. That is what happens when you have a president that acts like a king. He acts like he can just do anything that he wants. Is there another question? Here we go. All right, excellent. Thank you. So this is a question of Zach, and it comes from Instagram. And the question is, how can we hold this administration accountable when we keep hearing that what they are doing is illegal? So first of all, Zach, that's absolutely right. Over and over again, this administration is ignoring the law and they are just doing whatever the hell they want to do. And then the good news is that the courts are coming in afterwards and saying, no, you can't do that. But in the meantime, there has been so much damage that has been done by what this administration has done. So the question is, how can we hold this administration accountable? And we here in the Senate are doing everything that we can to hold them accountable. We're using all the tools that we can. We are shining a light on their bad behavior. We are talking about it. I talk about it all the time. when I go home. But I also want us all to understand that this is something that we all have to do. And everybody who is watching this and who is thinking about their own power in this moment, understand that power that you have to speak out about what you don't like and what you think is despicable about this administration is really a big thing too. In my home state of Minnesota, and I know this is happening all over the country, you might have people, we see this all the time, people that are showing up on street corners and holding out signs and talking to their neighbors about what they see happening in this country that they really dislike. There's a lot of power in that. There's a lot of power in people seeing the folks in their neighborhoods and in their communities holding this administration accountable too. And I see this in some of the reddest cities and towns in the state of Minnesota, and I know it's happening all over the country. So I think I have a friend here, somebody who's going to join me. We're going to do this. We're going to do a little bit of this together.
Yes.
All right. Welcome to the live stream.
Hello, everybody. Let's get shoulder to shoulder here.
I know, that's
All
right. Here.
All right. So let's go. What do we got here?
Right.
So we can't actually see the people, though.
No, we can't see the people.
We're
but
just
we
going to
can-
see their questions.
That's exactly
There's a
right.
bank of people back here who are reviewing the questions and pushing this out.
That's right. And it says right there, I should invite Senator Booker to join us. So it's good. It's good.
We're reading our instructions well, although they're not giving us the answers to these
No.
great questions. These are coming from us. So
That's
know that
exactly right.
But I will say that this is, where's this running live? What platform are we on?
Everywhere.
Every
Yeah,
platform?
that's
Do
awesome.
we have that power
It's
to go
incredible.
from like Snapchat all the way to Facebook? This is incredible. Okay, Judith from Instagram. Is it true that the bill delays actual cuts to Medicaid and Medicare until after the 2006 election? Is that true?
So one of the things that the Republicans in the House wanted to do is to delay all of the badness of the cuts to Medicaid until after the election.
Right.
Because they didn't want people to actually feel it. But here's the thing, they changed that at the end. So they want to see cuts to Medicaid and these sort of additional paperwork requirements on Medicaid. They want to see those take place like right away at the beginning of 2026. So that's going to be a big disaster for people because really what they're doing is they're like, they are work reporting requirements that we know are going to create massive bureaucracy and delays
Right.
for Americans. And people just will give up and they'll say, I can't navigate through this and keep my health insurance on Medicaid. And so I'm going to lose my health insurance. That's what's happening.
But the battle, there's a particular type of moral cowardice to know that you're going to take away people's lifeline, their health care. And you and I believe healthcare is a human right. And so here are folks knowing that they're going to kick millions of people off of healthcare. And it's not just folks who will fall off Medicaid, it's going to be folks that are going to fall off the Affordable Care Act as well, because the costs will go up.
That's exactly right.
And so what kind of cowardice is that to say that I don't want to have to answer to my voters, so I'm going to try to push it back? Now, the other challenge in the House that they had was that these fiscal hawks who wanted to show that they were cutting funding, wanted to show bigger cuts. So that's why they pushed back. Now, what's interesting is they're actually not cutting the deficit. They're exploding it by trillions of dollars.
That's right.
So whatever value they proclaim to have from their Christian evangelical moral values, well, I talk to pastors every day. You don't cut healthcare from the sick. You don't cut food from the hungry. You don't cut services for the disabled. That's not, what would Jesus do? That's not what Jesus would do. That violates that value. It violates the fiscal prudency. If you're a fiscal conservative, this is one of the worst bills. That's why Elon Musk is running around right now, calling it out, as is, what's his name, Massey over there in the House, that says that by their own numbers, he was showing up. This shows that this bill is going to do such damage to our grandchildren's grandchildren by running up debt.
That's right.
So great that the debt service, especially because under Trump interest rates are going up, the debt service is going to be so dramatic that it'll be bigger than any other expenditure we have, just trying to pay for the debt that we've been racking up.
I mean, and think about it. What we're talking about here is borrowing money in order to pay for tax cuts for people who are already tax breaks, for people that are already making hundreds, millions and millions of dollars. We're borrowing money from you in order to pay for their tax breaks. And that is so counter to what I think our values are in this country.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's getting me is when you say in our country, we're not talking about Democrat or Republican.
Right.
This
It's
is really not
American.
right or left, it's right or wrong.
Mhm.
And whatever values you come at life with, and I do think there's common national values, but there's no way to say that gutting and cutting programs that working class people are relying on to give the wealthiest in our country who've done very well over the
Right.
last 10, 25 years. We're seeing stratospheric wealth never ever before seen in humanity's history. But now we're going to say, hey, you deserve $250,000 more or 200 million more. And we're going to try to pay for that by cutting food and healthcare for
Right.
working, struggling Americans.
Well, and so the good news is, and look, we have another question
Another
from
question.
James here, but I want to say that the good news is that when Americans hear about what's in this big, beautiful budget bill, I don't think it's very beautiful, but what's in this big bill, they don't like it. They're like, this is not what I voted for. This is not what I want. I don't want to take healthcare away from people. I don't want to take food away from people. I don't want my utility bills to go up. So our job here is to try to get the word out about what is so bad about this bill. And so that's why you all participating in this really helps.
Yeah, it's almost like saying, Corey, you have a big afro. No matter how much you say it, I do not have one.
That's
This
true.
bill is not beautiful.
No.
It's got lots of hair. It's very hairy. I'm sorry, I'm trying here.
Okay, here we go.
She's just
Here we
like,
go.
get back to business.
Here we go. James.
James.
Okay. James's question, James says, I'm very concerned about this bill. It cannot pass the way it is. But I also want to know what is the mechanism that the government can deploy if Trump keeps on defying the courts?
Well, first of all, I want to say, I love what you said. It cannot pass. It sort of reminds me of the Lord of the Rings. You shall not pass. But that's just not going to happen. We say it cannot, but it very well can. And so the biggest impediment I see, and it was numbers that shocked me, was how few Americans even realize
Right.
what's being debated now, the timeline that they have, July 4th, they want to get it done before. So we're going to get to the second part of your question, but what I'm asking everyone to do is to get other folks aware of what is really happening in our country right now. That the most unpopular policy decisions, wildly unpopular with Republicans, Democrats, independents, when you talk about, ask people, do you want to cut food stamps, the biggest cut in the history of our country? Over 70% of Americans say do not cut it.
Don't do it.
Especially
see it happen.
if you add on to like to give tax cuts to the wealthy, even more people against it. Do you want to cut Medicaid? Over 70% of Americans against it. Do you want to cut Meals on Wheels for senior citizens? The overwhelming majority
You
of
want to
Americans.
cut Pell Grants so that people can't afford to go to college? No.
No.
Nobody wants to
So
do
this
that.
this is not
Hardly
again
anybody.
not a left or right.
Right.
There is some small amounts of Americans, but the majority of Americans see this as a right or wrong moment. But the problem we have is not enough people know about it. So this could pass because not enough people are saying what you're saying, James, which this cannot pass. And if you try to pass this, I'm going to hold you, my elected leader, accountable. So take a moment to get some of this content out there that's educating people. Now, you also, your other question, though, the second part of your question was very important. What is the mechanism that government can deploy if Trump keeps on defying courts? Well, I'm going to tell you, we've seen this moment in American history before where a president wanted to defy the courts. The Constitution has really, by having three branches of government, has mechanisms
That's right.
to stop a president. The checks and balances of the courts, the checks and balances provided by Congress. But those checks and balances do not work if a president is not held accountable by Congress. And so this is the test of our democracy right now. How much will Republican House members and senators let a president get away with if they're defying the law, the rule of law? And that is this constitutional test we are having right now. I am so happy. You know, Margaret Chase Smith's picture hangs right out this door or nearby where we are, let's put it this way.
Independent-minded Republican woman.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes, think about John McCain putting his thumb down along with Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. Let's talk about the Red Scare. I could go through all the periods of American history where you saw people standing up and saying, I'm going to choose principle over a party. I'm going to choose patriotism over party. I'm going to choose the people over party. And that's one of these moments.
And that's what we need right now. We really need Republicans in Congress to stand up. We are standing up, and I'm not even trying to be partisan here. I'm just stating the obvious, that we need Republicans in Congress to stand up against this president. Okay, so here we have another one, Pam.
Pam, hello,
Pam from
Pam.
Instagram.
Yes, that's my platform of choice. Not that we post on everything, but I actually use Instagram the most myself. Do you use?
Yeah, I use
Yes.
Instagram all the time.
Do you follow me?
I follow you.
Thank you very much.
Closely. Do you follow me, Corey?
I follow you joyfully. I follow you. You're gonna please, if you don't follow her on Instagram, Pam, follow Tina Smith on Instagram. All right.
Okay, so let's see. I'm not sure. Okay, Pam from Instagram wants to know, how will you remove? I'm not quite sure what this says.
The provisions, I think it's
provisions-
just an extra E got added
Oh,
on
okay.
it.
How you remove the provisions against judge from the BBB?
Oh, this is the provision
this?
that I'm going to phone a friend that allows it says the courts cannot hold the president in contempt.
Oh.
What's that? Yeah, they can't do nation.
Oh,
Yes. Well, is it that they can't? This is, first of all, this is your staffer who's now
Yeah.
working for me. I'm just like grilling your staffer.
Kyle works
Give
for
me
all
the
of
facts. And it was a great tie on, by the way. Great tie. I actually offered him money for that tie, and he rejected me soundly earlier today. But I thought this was this idea. I saw a provision that said that the courts can't hold them in contempt. It's what Marjorie
Okay.
Taylor Greene is now saying. I didn't know that this was in there,
Yeah.
but you're saying it's something else. It's hard to keep all the bad
Yeah.
tracks.
So I think I have an answer
Okay.
in general to this
Okay.
question. So, first of all, this is like, bear with us while we dive into this a little bit. But
Yes.
what the Republicans are doing is using a very particular and very arcane process that we have in the United States Senate that allows them to pass laws without with a
Without
simple
60,
majority,
yeah,
with a simple majority, like a 51. But part of the deal for accomplishing that is that what they pass in this law needs to be primarily about taxes and spending. It can't be just policy. Okay, and I'm not going to go into all the crazy names for this. There's something called a bird bath and all of that. But here's what you need to know. We Democrats are going to be doing everything that we can to strip out of this bill provisions that are bad policy. And we are going to use all the tools that we have to get those things out of the bill.
Right.
Like this. So this thing about this provision against judges that is in the bill, we are hopeful that we can just take that out at the very beginning of this process, and we're going to do everything we can to make that happen.
And so there is a process. Again, I've had to learn this over the 10 years I've been
Right.
here, where you actually go to the parliamentarian and you
Just sort of like the referee on the Senate rules.
right, that you make your case. It's almost
Exactly.
like I'm making my case through this person that's supposed to be impartially evaluating you, and that is actually a process that you go and you make your case. This should not be allowed into the major bill, and that's one of the ways we have.
Right, in order to get some of these really bad provisions that are in this bill. So here's another example of something that I'm really strongly opposed to, and most Minnesotans are, that there's a provision in this bill that would allow this Chilean mining company to build a copper nickel mine right on the borders of the boundary waters that's going to pollute the boundary
Oh my
waters.
God.
And it's in there, it got put in there, and we're going to try to take it out using this special process that we have in the Senate because it's bad for Minnesota. It basically is enriching this big Chilean mining company and hurting the beautiful boundary waters, and it needs to get taken out of there. So we're going to try to use this process, do everything we can to use this special process to get it taken out.
Okay, and the boundary waters for New Jersey people, that is these extraordinary waters that you all have along the Great Lakes, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. It's
Right.
beautiful, beautiful lakes on the border of Canada.
That's extraordinary. And I will say to this, though, that's not the only way to get that provision out of the bill. The other way is public outrage. It really is. We're already seeing some cracks in some House members. I woke up on my podcast this morning. I was hearing quotes from a few House members that realized a provision was in here about the courts and said, I didn't agree to that. Their hold on getting this passed is very tenuous. They have a 4-vote majority in the
That's a great point,
House
Corey.
and a 4-vote majority here. If they lose 4 people who are shaken by the public outrage, who are moved by the public outrage, because the majority of people in their states are calling their offices, showing up at their town halls, coming to the Capitol, letting them know. That can mean that suddenly you can start seeing people not vote for this bill, and the whole thing would fall. So that we are going to use every procedural tool that we have, but you have the greatest power, because in a democracy, the power of the people is greater than the people in power if we use it. Right now, if you treat this democracy like a spectator sport and sit on the sidelines and just watch those of us that are on the field, we don't have the votes. But when you all get on the field and join us,
right. It's really
that's
up
how-
to all of us.
Yeah, that's how we stop the Affordable Care Act from being stripped away in his first term.
That's right.
All
That's
right.
right. American people have a lot of power, and we need everybody to use their power.
Have
right
you
now.
ever heard of last call? Like when you've been out with friends and they
I
say
usually
last
am
call.
home before last call, but I
No.
have heard of such a thing.
I
have heard of, is this our last call?
I want to
Lori?
tell. I know you've heard these words. I don't care where you're going, but you can't stay here. I know you've closed down a bar or two. Maybe it was in your younger years, 5 years ago.
So this is our last call.
That's what I'm saying. This
That's
is the
right.
last
Okay.
call.
All right. So this is the question from Bonnie on Facebook.
Do you? I used to use Facebook a lot more.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan. We
Yeah,
post
I
on
still
Facebook.
post on Facebook a lot. A lot of people pay a lot of attention to
A
Facebook.
lot of people still pay
Yeah.
attention to Facebook. It's such
Yeah.
a great platform. Bonnie, I'm glad you asked this question.
Do you
Thank
want
you,
to read
Bonnie.
the question?
This is my first reading of the question.
Right.
Should I read it in Bonnie, I wish I knew your voice. I need your voice, Bonnie, here. But you are saying in plain text, how is this even possible? We pay for the programs. Why can't we say where our money goes? That is a powerful question.
It gets to the core of the challenge, the problem that we have right now with this president, because your elected representatives have passed laws that say, here's the money that we have, and here's what we think that we should do for the money for the good of our country. That's the way our democracy works. But what's happening right now is Donald Trump and Elon Musk, although he seems to be a little on the outs these days, said, no, we're going to do something completely different with this money. We're going to decide, separate from what your elected representatives decided, we're going to determine where this money goes. And so you're right. How is that even possible? They are really going against the laws of this country in a really fundamental way. And so again, this is where we are standing up to this. We're saying this is wrong. This is not the way democracy works. Donald Trump is not the king. Our Constitution says we the people. It doesn't say we the billionaires. And it is up to all of us to stand up to this just blatant power grab is basically what it is.
And I'll just say, look, there are very wealthy people who pay lobbyists, corporations do this, to come down here and advocate for things. And there are interest groups, right-wing think tanks that just want to do tax cuts. They actually want to make the government so anemic that it can't function. So there's a whole bunch of forces that are pushing against this. But what I am saying, if the affected people, and all of us will be affected, if we, the affected people, stand up and fight, because I know in New Jersey, hospitals could close. In rural areas, we could see hospital closures. In New Jersey, millions of people could lose benefits that, as you said, that they've been paying for in their taxpayer dollars. We can see our children and our seniors getting hurt. All of these things are in the balance right now. And so, yes, it's possible, but I want to do what I think is also possible, which is to fight back against this. It is sobering how close we are. We have a 4-vote margin. They're trying to ram it through. But I say this over and over again, American history, if it is anything, it's a perpetual testimony to the achievement of impossible things against impossible odds. That's really where we are. We have just days. They're trying to pass this bill through the Senate by July 4th. We just have days. And the question isn't what they are going to do. The most important question right now is, what are we going to do? Are we going to make it impossible? I'm waving.
And here we have
This
another one of our best colleagues.
Yes.
Here's Senator Tim Kaine.
I'm going to say this. I'm going to stay here for a second because I know there's more questions coming. Tim, sit down.
Okay.
I'm going to be the one that's going to go behind.
I'm gonna do it.
I'm going to leave too.
I'm
Tim.
going to be your
Okay.
hype man. She's
Right.
going to leave also.
Right.
Okay.
But I just want to say that the reason why I love Tim Kaine is because he's not only one of the just brilliant senators that are here, but he's also, all of us would agree, he's one of the great moral voices in the United States Senate. I've said this about him many times. If you had people on both sides of the aisle vote for like who is a great moral voice. Republicans had to vote for a Democrat or Republican, he would probably win, or at least be in the
Well,
top 5 or 10 of the great
you,
moral
Corey.
voices in the Senate.
That's
and that's
very
why,
humbling to hear that.
That's why I think that you're getting these questions is going to be a really good thing, because I think you're going to be able to answer them from the facts of the bill, but also what does it mean for the character of our country and the need that we need more people to step up to understand this is a moral moment and fight.
Very much, very
fight.
much.
And he's also like a kick-ass harmonica player.
I mean, you got to have a
Which is
fallback
like,
in
I
my line
know.
of work.
That's right. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna take it
Thank
over.
you.
We leave you to it.
All right.
And I'm going to pull this chair away.
Okay, cool.
And let you slide that chair
Great.
over.
Well, to Corey and Tina, I really appreciate you guys doing this and all of you for signing in. This is a moral moment for sure. This is going to be one of the most important next couple of weeks in my 13 years in the Senate as we grapple with this big abomination, the big betrayal. And before I take the first question, I just want to say, look, the whole game here is the Republicans are trying to give tax breaks to the wealthiest to hurt everyday people and basically hurt them in 3 ways. Cutting programs they really care about, Medicaid, SNAP, and others. Killing jobs. When you kill the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, what you're doing is you're killing economic innovation in the energy space, which is like the industry of the 21st century, and also raising people's costs. What they're doing, but with tax breaks to the wealthiest, are also going to drive up people's costs, whether it's for energy, food, building supplies, et cetera. So we got to stand for everyday folks and not gut things that matter to them to benefit the folks at the top end. Let me read a question that's coming in, and this is from Suzanne Lambert's audience. What are you doing to help federal employees keep their jobs? Will you challenge the new federal hiring practices? And I appreciate that question very much. Senator from Virginia, a lot of federal jobs, a lot of pain. I was at a eulogy for a friend of mine, Jerry Connolly, a congressman who died last week. A lot of federal employees there coming to talk about Jerry's advocacy, but also their stress. The pastor of the church dealing with a lot of people who are stressed. Earlier today, we had a hearing with an FDA official, and I asked them, how many folks have you fired? I can't answer that. How many of them have been veterans? I can't answer that. So we're going to be in the reconciliation bill doing amendments that will try to force this issue about unlawful firings. We're working with a number of lawyers and organizations that are in court challenging the firings. President Trump sent us a bill called a rescission bill yesterday, trying to get Congress to sign on and say, no, we like these DOGE cuts, including the jobs. We're not going to support that. We're going to work to get our colleagues, Republican colleagues, to reject it. And then we have some pieces of legislation to try to protect, for example, the notion that the civil service should not be political. It shouldn't be populated by political hacks, but instead by people with expertise. So we're fighting bad budget, and we're also advancing legislative priorities that we have some reason to believe we can find some Republican support on. Next question. Okay, really important one. And this is Paula, and she submitted it via Instagram. How do we pressure Republicans to keep Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP? Let me tell you what's at stake in this bill so far. SNAP, the nutrition program for families and kids. In Virginia, we have like 8.5 million people. 800,000 use SNAP benefits. And the estimate is the House bill would reduce or eliminate the SNAP benefit for more than 200,000. What is a SNAP benefit? If you don't know, you'd be shocked at how paltry it is. I did a roundtable with SNAP recipients on Monday, and I asked somebody who was talking to me about SNAP, what is your SNAP benefit? You are a low-income person, you qualify for food assistance, how much is it a day? She said, I get $4.75 a day to feed myself. Are you kidding me? They want to reduce it on Medicaid. The likelihood is the Medicaid cuts that they are proposing are going to cost 16 million Americans. The CBO just said that this morning. 16 million Americans will lose health insurance in Medicaid expansion, or they'll lose health insurance because of reductions to the premium subsidies under the Affordable Care Act. That's what they want to do. And then Medicare, you won't find a Medicare cut line item in there, but what they're doing to push up the deficit is going to cause a sequestration that will affect Medicare, and it could affect Medicare by $500 million of cuts. So how do we pressure them to keep Medicare, Medicaid, and SNAP? We have to make this, I think, one of the first pillars of our attack, the safety net programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and SNAP. And I believe Democrats will. When we say tax breaks for the rich to hurt everyday people, hurt programs they care about, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP. Cut jobs, raise costs. We're going to make this the front end of the argument, and you can help us. The last time that we beat the Republicans on a reconciliation bill was in the summer of 2017 when they stopped their effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act. But remember, they didn't just try to do that. They also tried to cut Medicaid. And that cut to Medicaid generated intense citizen activism, people calling, people writing, but more importantly, people showing up right here in the Capitol. And because of the proposed cuts to Medicaid, we eventually won that battle because Republicans caved. We're going to make that the pillar of our attack, and we think that we have a chance of winning that one. Thanks for asking that question about Medicaid. Ann has asked a question on Facebook. Okay, what about Trump becoming king is allowed in the bill? Okay, so there's a bunch of different ways I can take that, I guess. First, no kings, right? I mean, you might see I'm wearing the Virginia state seal on my suit, and it's a woman representing virtue standing atop a toppled monarch with his crown falling off, and the motto says "Sic Semper Tyrannis," thus be it always to tyrants. Our nation was established to make sure we didn't have tyrants. And look, President Trump is a tyrant, and his only limitation, he'll do whatever he wants. His only limitation is what we as active citizens in a democracy put up as limitations around his tyranny. One provision that I'm particularly focused on in the House bill would essentially prohibit courts from holding administration officials in contempt when they violate court orders. That's sort of kingly behavior. I'm above the law. President Trump thinks he's above the law. And the House is doing his bidding by putting a provision in the bill that essentially would insulate them from civil contempt charges if they ignore court orders. So that's kingly behavior that we're not going to accept. We're going to beat that here in the Senate. Let's see, is there a next question? Okay, well, the next question is coming in. I do just want to go back to this question about SNAP, Medicaid, Medicare. I went to the Fredericksburg area regional food bank in Virginia. It's about 70 miles south of DC on Monday. And I had a roundtable with 15 people or so. Half of them were from organizations like the food bank and churches that provide food to hungry people, and half were SNAP recipients. And one of the things they said, and this was echoed in a spotlight hearing that we had earlier today, if you take away somebody's SNAP benefit, it's like pulling a thread that starts to unravel the whole fabric of protection of the safety net. Because if you qualify for SNAP benefits, that also means you can qualify for Medicaid, for Head Start, for school lunch programs. You don't have to, separately qualify for all these programs. So any SNAP cut also ends up affecting all kinds of other basic programs that people really rely on. And that's what ours are doing, pulling on that thread of SNAP and starting to unravel the whole fabric of basic safety net protection that we put in place in a humane and compassionate way. Okay, Lori asked a good one on Facebook. What would the Democrats support that would improve Medicaid? What improvements would you propose? Look, we have dramatically improved Medicaid during the time I've been here by doing the Affordable Care Act, which allowed states, didn't require them, allowed states to expand Medicaid to cover more people. That Medicaid expansion in Virginia meant that about 400,000 people now in Virginia have health insurance that didn't have it before. Many had never had it before, and now they do it. So things we can do to expand coverage are positive. We also the Democrats did a really important thing with Medicaid during the last administration. We expanded Medicaid coverage for moms post-delivery. We had a big a maternal mortality problem in this country, the death of a mom in the first year after the delivery of a child, which leaves the child without a mother. And our maternal mortality rate is awful compared to other comparable nations. One of the reasons for that is we allowed Medicaid to cover a low-income mom delivering a baby, but that coverage cut off after 60 days. And an awful lot of postpartum conditions just get worse and worse and worse. Democrats, without a single Republican vote, Democrats expanded Medicaid coverage for moms post-delivery from 60 days to a year. And so that's a significant improvement. So those are the kinds of things that Democrats have done. In this particular bill, the reconciliation, frankly, we're probably not going to be able to advance more on Medicaid, but what we need to do is save the gains on Medicaid that we've fought so hard for, that have enabled so many more people to have high quality care. Let's see if there's a next question up. And I've got an exciting thing to announce to you. The person who's going to follow me is somebody who I really, really admire, but I'm going to see if there's another question before I introduce her. All right, it looks like I should. Okay, I'm going to introduce her. I'm seeing that coming up on the screen. Catherine Cortez Masto is a great friend. She is the senator from Nevada, as you all know. She was an attorney general in Nevada before, and she's somebody who really plays lead with us on so many issues in the Senate. She's a no-nonsense, practical, can make it plain. And now my friend Catherine Cortez Masto is going to come here and make it plain for you. Thanks. Hey, Catherine.
How are you, my
Hey,
friend?
good.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
Good job. Hello, everyone. I am so pleased to be able to join you. If you don't know, I'm from Nevada, and I have been home this past week talking to Nevadans about the impact that this reconciliation bill is going to have in Nevada and really across the country. And it is just, it's a scary time for so many Nevadans. There's so much chaos and uncertainty already with this administration and their policies. And what we are seeing now is just the negative impact that this reconciliation bill has. It's Medicaid cuts. You're hearing about that. It is, but there's so much to it. So I am so glad that we are having this conversation with all of you, because I think it helps as you ask questions about what is in it. We are able to talk to you real time so that you see what's going on. So I understand the question just came through from Pam on Facebook. And our question is, can we as people organize to show our opposition to this horrible bill? And absolutely, yes, that's the point here. This is about all Americans coming forward. This is your Congress. These are your elected representatives, and they are actually behind closed doors imposing and putting together policy that is going to harm the American public. So absolutely, this is the goal here, is to make sure that we're shining a light on what is happening so that all of you can use your voices, use your organization skills, and get out in your community and talk, whether you're reaching out to your congressional members or just making the rest of your community understanding what's at stake. Because, here's the thing, we've talked a lot about healthcare. There's so much in this. There's energy impacts on our clean energy for our future, and clean water and clean air. There is, besides the healthcare impact to Medicaid, there's impact to Medicare, and there's a ripple effect. You don't have to be on Medicaid or have the Affordable Care Act. If you're just sitting home and you think, well, I'm not going to be impacted because I'm not on Medicaid, you will be impacted by these cuts. It's going to have a ripple effect, and it's going to increase premiums for individuals who have insurance. They are also potentially going to lose access to healthcare if a rural hospital closes because of these Medicaid cuts, or a hospital decides they're going to have to cut a maternity unit or somewhere to kind of address the challenges that they're seeing in these Medicaid cuts. So too many people are going to lose access to essential health care. So I have another question, and this is from Jessica Craven's audience member, Deb. And here's a question regarding Medicare. What services will have to be reduced to account for the $500 billion cutbacks, or will out-of-pocket costs increase? I'm looking for specifics as much as possible, because that's what will make people sit up and take notice. You're absolutely right. So as we are looking at the Medicare cuts, what we will see and what's going to happen are increases in out-of-pocket costs for seniors could be impacted. But we're also looking at the other things that seniors rely on. So think about it this way. We work so hard as Democrats to address Medicare cuts when we cap the cost of insulin for seniors, when we put more money in their pockets, when we actually required a prescription drug negotiation at the federal level for the first time so we can lower prescription drug costs. Now, what this $500 billion cutback does is really take away some of those savings at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, think about it in terms of what was given and what we fought for, and some of that is going to be taken back as well, along with out-of-pocket cost increase and other things that could happen for seniors when they rely on Medicare. So that's what's at stake. It's such a bigger and broader issue because we have worked so hard to bring those cuts and address Medicare and make sure seniors have the ability to access that preventative care or access the care that they need over the years. And all of that work we have done is going to be rolled back to pay for some of the cutbacks that we see. So that's the challenge for seniors. And let me talk about a couple of other things, because when I was home, I got a question with respect to one of our young Democrats, somebody who was on campus, college campus, asking in general, listen, not as a Democrat or Republican, as a college student, he wanted to know the impacts of this reconciliation bill to education. And let me see, it's going to be devastating. I'm here to tell you that. They want to cut back Pell Grants. They want to eliminate the options that you have right now to pay your student loans and go back to a time that you only have one ability to pay, and it's going to be a standard preset payment that you make. And if you have a hardship and you want to do it on income-based, then you have to prove that. So they're going to eliminate the payment plans now and put it back to just the 2 payment plans. The other thing that they're going to do is roll back a rule that actually protected our active military from being scammed by predators in these for-profit schools. They're repealing that. So for-profit schools now can take advantage of some of our military when they're seeking access to these loans for their health care. So there's another question here from Lori on Facebook. So what is sequestration with regard to how Medicare cuts are being proposed? I'm going to make this very simple because most people don't understand sequestration, but it is a budgeting tool that requires certain things to kick in if the budget isn't done in a timely fashion. So very, very simple. And so what is happening now, because we're going through this reconciliation package and they're not doing the budgeting process in a timely fashion, sequestration kicks in and this pay-as-you-go requirement kicks in, and it mandates under the law that Congress has to, for lack of a better word, balance this budget. And so it's mandating that if it is not addressed by Congress, that Medicare cuts will happen. It automatically happens in the law unless we specifically address it. So that's sequestration. There's a lot of tools and policies that are being addressed right now. And I think we're trying to make it as simple as possible so people understand the real life consequences of this legislation at the end of the day. We want to make it simple so people understand you're going to either lose your health care, your costs are going to be higher for you around your health care. It doesn't matter whether you have Medicare or not, you're still going to see higher costs because there's the ripple effect. And we haven't even talked about the impact on food assistance. So many Americans across the country, working people, seniors, veterans, children rely on food assistance, and they're cutting that as well. So there's a lot at stake, and we're just trying to get the information out there. And let me just finally say, you guys are key to all of this. Once you know about it, your voices and your organization around making your voices being heard are key so that we can knock out this bill, take out the toxic pieces of it, make sure that at the end of the day, the billionaire class, they do not get the tax cuts. They should be paying their fair share. This is the largest transfer of wealth in this country. This bill is the largest transfer of wealth from the poor and the middle class, the working class, to the billionaire class. That's what this bill does. So Donald Trump's, that's his intent with this. And they're trying to hide it around language that really is not telling the truth about what's written in the legislation. And at the end of the day, if we don't fight as a country, if we don't talk about what's in it, and then stand up and demand that it not occur and demand the change, and actually ensure that we as a country are fighting for our poor, fighting for our working class, we should have every advantage, just like the billionaire class, and they should not get all these breaks. That's what this is about at the end of the day. So I cannot thank you enough for everybody listening. I am also excited now I get the opportunity to introduce the next senator who is going to be with you right now. Listen, I'm a fan of hers. I'm a girl fan because she's phenomenal. And she has just the passion and the gut and the persistence to really fight for this country. She has proven that, and you will know that when I say who she is. But I get to work with her every single day, and I am so pleased and honored to be able to do just that. So joining us now is Senator Duckworth from Illinois, and I'm going to invite her to join me. How are you doing? Good. Let me move this out of the way.
Amazing.
You got it.
Thank you,
You're
CCM.
welcome. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you. How awesome is Senator Cortez Masto? She and I were in the class of 2016 together. Hi, everyone. I have a question. Ann on Facebook, what do you feel is the worst of this bill that we should be worrying about? Well, there's so much in this bill that is so bad. It begins with how much it adds to our deficit. In the short term, upwards of $2 trillion. In the long term, over 30 years, as much as $47 to $50 trillion. That'll put this country into an economic downward spiral that will be hard to recover from. And I certainly don't want my 10-year-old and my 7-year-old to have to be paying back a $47 trillion national debt. But within the bill itself, in giving those tax cuts, in putting that deficit on the backs of the American people, it cuts significant amounts from Medicaid. And frankly, Medicaid isn't just about people who are on the lower end of the economic spectrum. It's about all of us, because hospitals rely on Medicaid dollars in order to function. I sat down with the Illinois Hospital Association, and many of them said, if these Medicaid dollars go away, we are the last hospital standing in a tri-county area, in a quad county area that is serving people in this rural community. And if these Medicaid dollars go away and people no longer have access to them, our hospital will shut down. And in addition to losing healthcare, you will also be losing a major employer in the region. My next question is from Dawn. Dawn on Facebook, what are we doing to keep NIH funding for cancer research? Well, we're fighting them on this bill. We're going to push to get that funding restored. We're trying very hard to have it restored. The president is trying to send over what's called a rescissions package, which is his attempt to formalize the cuts that DOGE made to NIH funding. So we're going to fight him on both the rescissions package, which is Senate speak and legislative speak, for him trying to finalize what Elon Musk did by taking a chainsaw to the NIH budget. And it also, at the same time, in this bill, in this budget bill, is a huge cut to the National Institutes of Health. This is where we do the cutting edge research on cancer, on all sorts of illnesses, and we lead the world in this. And you know what happens when we cut NIH funding? All these laboratories shut down, and then we lose these scientists. Already, we have other nations in Europe, in Asia, that are wooing our scientists, saying, hey, you know what, you're losing your NIH funding, come to us. We'll give you a lab for 10 years, for 20 years, and you can do your research. But move to Japan, move to Switzerland, move to Germany, come here. And we don't want that kind of a brain drain to happen. So we need to make sure that we continue to fund the NIH. So Rachel Bender's audience has asked, what exactly is a budget reconciliation bill? This is basically a way to put forward the nation's budget. It's basically trying to reconcile between what the House is putting forward and what the Senate is putting forward. And we need to make sure that whatever all the bad stuff that's in the House bill, we need to go after it. And we need to make sure that we take out all of the really negative cuts to funding programs, whether it is for ag, whether it's for Medicare, Medicaid. There's significant cuts also to veteran services in this bill. It's a way for them to come through and just slash all sorts of funding. And they're using it to get around the parliamentarian of the Senate, which is a former procedure. Frankly, they're not supposed to do that. It's basically the nuclear option, riding roughshod over the minority, not listening to Senate procedures and following Senate protocols. And it's their way of shoving essentially trillions of dollars of debt down taxpayers' throats in order to, support the lifestyle of Trump's billionaire buddies at the expense of families, middle-income families that are just trying to get by. Kirk on Facebook, how can we stop the provision that defunds the university centers of excellence that focus on services and self-advocacy for people with disabilities? These are some of the most marginalized people in our country. It's unconscionable to me that we would become a country that doesn't ensure people with disabilities have what they need to be productive members of society. I agree with you 1000%, and I'm gonna fight every chance that I get. This is one of the places that we're gonna push back as hard as we can on this bill to try to restore that funding. It's about the centers of excellence, but it is also about Medicaid programs and Social Security programs and Medicare programs and healthcare services. And it's also about wraparound services so that people with disabilities can get the support services that they need so that they can leave the house and go to work or go to school. But the centers of excellence are critically important for moving the agenda, moving policy around the country to support persons with disabilities. It's how, under these programs and the advocacy groups, that we move from institutionalized people as the basic thing that we normally do to actually understanding that people do better when they stay there in their own homes, when they live in the community. Now, if you want to be in a group home setting, you can choose to do that, but really what people with disability want to do is live their lives like everybody else in our communities. And if that is the best for you, you should be able to do that. But that shift in how we treat people with disabilities happened in the centers of excellence and happened with advocacy groups who stepped forward, many of whom got training in those centers of excellence. So we're going to do everything we can to push back. This is all part of the cuts that they're using. And they're basically cutting services for persons with disabilities in order to fund tax cuts for the Mar-a-Lago crowd, and that's simply not acceptable. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Senator Patty Murray, my good friend. She is the person leading our fight in this. She is pushing as hard as she can and trying every procedure that we can, and she is our quarterback among all the Democrats to push back on this fight. So without further ado, Senator Patty Murray of Washington. Hi, Patty. It's all yours, hon.
Well, hi, I'm Senator Patty Murray from Washington State. Great to follow my good friend Tammy Duckworth, who's just an inspiration to all of you. Okay, I'm taking a question from Judith from Instagram. Is it true that the bill delays actual cuts to Medicaid and Medicare until after the 2026 election? Well, that's a really good question. In order to make this feel better, what the House Republicans did before they passed the bill is they put in some of the really detrimental parts of Medicaid to be enacted after the 2026 election. Of course, they don't want their constituents to say they did this, so they think that by doing that, it kind of hides the ball and nobody will really feel it. But the fact is that actually these cuts to Medicaid will be felt by everyone before the election. So I don't know what they were trying to cover up. Let me tell you why. Because the cuts to healthcare in the House passed reconciliation bill will start to be felt as everyone begins to implement them. And health insurers for everybody, not just for Medicaid and not just for people on the ACA, will start having their actuaries say, what is this going to cost me if a bunch of people lose their health care? It's going to cost me more because more people will be going to emergency rooms and hospitals and doctors that don't have insurers. So as an insurer overseeing this, I'm going to raise my rates for everybody so I get covered. So everybody's rates are going to go up that has insurance right now. If you're not on Medicaid, not on any of the ACA, your rates will go up. So I don't know why they think they're hiding the ball. But yes, in the bill itself, they had the actual, many of these requirements go into effect after the election in 2026. Okay, I'm taking a question from Sandra from Facebook. Trump says we're not changing Medicaid, just cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. Yet 8.6 million may lose coverage. Fraud is already illegal. Why not enforce the law instead? Oh my gosh, I wish everybody was saying that out loud every single day, because I love how Republicans always say, oh, we're going to cut education, we're going to cut healthcare, we're going to get rid of all this waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, I can tell you, as someone who's been here for a long time, worked on many budget bills, healthcare bills, and everything, I have heard all this talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, but I haven't seen any evidence that it is going to actually save us billions of dollars. Sure, any program, anywhere is going to have people that abuse it. But we go after them right now. It is illegal, and those people are held accountable, or those providers, or whoever is trying to take advantage of the system. Yeah, we need to enforce that, but you know what that takes? It takes people at the agencies who are following up on this and making sure that anybody who is illegally using or abusing any of these programs is taken care of. What did Trump do? He fired all those people. So what the Republicans have actually done is get rid of the people who actually can go after waste, fraud, and abuse. And then they put this bill forward saying that that everybody who's losing their coverage is somehow frauding the government. And the two of them can't be the same, and they can't be true. The real fact is that this bill, this reconciliation bill, the so-called big beautiful bill, or as I say, this big beautiful betrayal, will actually make people lose the coverage they have. It will be horrific, and we need to speak up, and we need to speak up loud. Okay, the next question, Shannon from Instagram. What will happen when people lose SNAP and Medicare? Every one of us should be asking that. It's so easy to think that, well, okay, some people are going to lose their nutrition coverage, some people are going to lose their Medicaid, but it won't be me. I guarantee there will be someone in your life that this affects. 8.6 million people losing their healthcare coverage through Medicaid alone means that somebody's grandmother won't be able to stay in a nursing home. It means somebody whose child is extremely sick, who doesn't get paid enough or doesn't get health care through their provider, will lose their coverage. I'll just give you a great example. I used to teach preschool, and I can tell you, when one of your kids comes to school sick, everybody gets sick. So if we have a lot of people in this country who don't get health care, don't get preventive care, don't get the care they need, it will impact every single one of us. Okay, next question is Maddie from YouTube. Can you talk about why SNAP is so important? I'm going to tell you my personal experience with this. SNAP is a nutrition program. It basically says in the United States of America, if you cannot afford to feed your family, there's a little bit of help for you, not much, but just some basic nutrition that your family can get so that we don't starve people in this country. I know this personally because when I was in high school many years ago, my dad was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and he lost his job. 7 kids in my family. Now, my mom had been staying home. She didn't have any job skills. She had to go out and get some skills and get a job. So there were several months where we had no income, 7 kids. What happened? We had a nutrition program in this country that for a few months helped put food on my family's table. No one wanted to be, recipient of that, but it made a huge difference for my family. And it's one of the things that drives me every single day. We have to make sure that program is there. So families like mine, people that by, not because of anything they did, but because of circumstances in their lives, get that little bit of nutrition that they need so they can be on their feet. Why is that important? Because of the 7 kids in my family, we all grew up. We all now contribute back to our country. I have a brother who is a firefighter. I have a sister who's a teacher. I'm a United States Senator. We wouldn't be here and be able to do our jobs if our country wasn't at our back. SNAP Medicaid are programs that are at our backs when we need them. And as a country, we have to make sure they're there for others. Okay, this is for a creator, Rachel Bender. Good to talk with you. She has an audience question. How will current student loan plans be transitioned to this new student loan plan in the bill? Well, good question, and I have no idea. First of all, we have a president who is bound and determined, along with his education secretary, Secretary McMahon, to dismantle the Department of Education. What does the Department of Education do? One of their critical things they do is manage the student loan program. Well, now they've fired or gotten rid of all the people who manage that. And now they're talking about a new student loan plan with nobody who's going to plan, organize, make sure it works, get information out to people, process claims. I have no idea how this administration thinks that they can accomplish anything without the people to do it. And by the way, I think that's their goal. They want the program not to work. This is why we have to speak up really loud. Okay, this is Lori on Facebook. Can you give an example of how much money Medicare cuts consequent to sequestration would affect an individual average Medicare beneficiary? Well, first of all, the House passed this in the middle of the night. Everybody's just starting to understand it, including Republicans who have failed to read it before they voted on it. And I don't think anybody really knows the answer to that question. We are going to look at and see what the Republicans in the Senate put forward. But the broader answer to your question is the way that the House wrote this bill, it will impact everyone in our country in multiple ways, including people on Medicare under this perverse provision called sequestration, which means if you hit a debt limit, then everybody across the board gets cut. That actually will go into effect next January. So don't let anybody tell you this doesn't touch Medicare. It will. Shannon from Instagram, what will happen? Oh, oops, hold on, I'm getting another question here. Okay, Susan Lambert, how are Senate Dems celebrating Pride Month? Oh, good question. I think many of our Senate colleagues are out in their states attending Pride events. I just did a video for a big, huge event that occurs in Seattle. I think many of us are watching how this administration has just gone after anybody who they think is outside their norm, and that includes many members of our LGBTQ community. I've talked to so many of them who are really feeling vulnerable right now because of these attacks. So Senate Dems, many of them, including myself, are standing up, standing proud, and standing beside all of our members of the LGBTQ community this month. Okay, Annie from Instagram. What are the Democrats' plans to usher in young and upcoming leaders into the legislature? This is really important question because I hear from too many people who say, I don't want to be involved in politics. I would never choose that as a career. Who would want to do this? For a lot of reasons, having to raise money to run for office, all of the criticism you get from everybody. If you've been on X, you know that we all get those nasty little messages back and they're going, why would I want to do that to myself? Well, what I would say to every young person out there is that this is your country, whether it's your community and you want to serve in a school board, whether it's the city council, whether it's your state legislature, or even here in the United States Senator. What I can tell you is if you sit at home and gripe about it, you don't make a difference. But if you go out, get involved, have your friends help you, run for office, that's how you make change. So I think one of the most important things we can do is inspire young people by fighting today, by telling them they can make a difference, showing them they can make a difference, and personally involving them in our offices. And we all try to do that. But I would say to any young person out there, don't you be one of those people who just says, I'm going to give up. Don't say you don't care. You do care. This is your country, your community, your family, your future. Get involved, run for office. You can make a difference. Okay. I know that my friend Jeff Merkley, Senator from Oregon, I'm from Washington, he's from the state right below me, is going to be here shortly, and he has been a great member of our Senate family. He heads the Budget Committee, which sounds kind of boring, but it actually determines where our money's going to be spent, much like you and your own budget, whether you're a family member and you decide whether you're going to buy a house or rent a house, or how much food you're going to spend, or whether you're going to go to the movies. That's all in your budget. And Jeff Merkley is our budget leader here in the Senate Democratic Caucus, and he helps us make decisions about what we invest in to make our country stronger, and fights for them every day. And I'm very proud to turn this over to him right now. So, Jeff.
Great, thank you so much, Patty. And as you may know, Senator Murray leads our Appropriations Committee on the Democratic side, and that's an incredibly important position as we strive to use America's Treasury dollars in the most effective fashion available to create a foundation for families to thrive, whether it's housing or healthcare or education or economic strategies that create good paying jobs. So we have a question that's come in from Annie. And, from Joe from YouTube. How do Medicaid cuts affect those of us on Medicare? Okay, well, this is one of the more complicated questions that you could ask, because there is a provision in the law that says if significant deficits are created, those deficits will be remedied through a provision that would cut essentially programs across the board, but Medicare is limited to 4%. But we could be looking, as a result of the big, beautiful, not so beautiful, very ugly bill, we call it the big, beautiful betrayal bill, because the bill essentially throws families under the bus. It proceeds to say, hey, we're going to take health care from 16 million people to fund tax giveaways to the richest Americans. We're going to cut food programs, meaning about 4 million children will go hungry, to fund tax giveaways to billionaires. You add it all up, and this entire Republican big, beautiful betrayal of families bill proceeds to result in so much deficit that it could well produce a 4% cut in Medicare. And exactly how that cut would be applied to which aspects of Medicare, all that would have to be figured out. But just recognize there is a connection. This bill is doing devastating effect to Medicaid, which has a different name in every state. And my home state of Oregon is the Oregon Health Plan. But the bill as a whole can also result in a significant cut to Medicare. And now we're going to go to Colin Berry's question. And he is asking, what will the people on Medicaid be expected to do? Are there any alternative health insurance plans people can look into? And Colin mentions this is such a disaster. Yes, it is. So if we think about the very divided structure of healthcare in America, we have Medicare, which is generally folks who are 65 or older. We have private health insurance. We have some companies that are self-insured. We have the Children's Health Insurance Plan called CHIP. We have a separate healthcare system for veterans. And we have Medicaid. And Medicaid began as a program for the least affluent among us, that they'd be able to have healthcare. Well, it also now does long-term care for seniors. It provides support for those with disabilities. A lot of veterans get their health care actually through support through Medicaid. It is a key provider of funding for our rural hospitals and our rural healthcare clinics. But so here we are in that entire situation. And so there's many different people receiving help through different aspects of Medicaid. But let me talk about just your general family that's less affluent. That has Medicaid, and the state says, well, they've made it very, very hard for people to sign up. They've wrapped the application process in red tape. They've made it more expensive for states, and states don't have the money to be able to keep his expansive program. So you get a message saying, sorry, but we're shutting this down. What are you supposed to do? So that's why Colin's question is so important. And the answer is, you're in trouble. The estimates are now that this bill will cause 50,000 more deaths a year. Why is that? Well, so you have diabetes, but you don't have health insurance, and so you can't manage that diabetes, and it causes more trouble. Or you have congestive heart failure, but you don't go in and get help. You have a cancer that could have been stopped in the early stages, but it grows. And you know, this is very personal to me because back when I was the director of Habitat for Humanity, I hired a construction manager, and in the first week on work, he had an artery burst in his throat because he had cancer in his throat, but he hadn't got it treated because he didn't have health insurance. And he's leaning over a sink, blood pouring from his mouth and his nose, and I'm like grabbing him, holding him up and saying, this is not a nosebleed, I gotta get you to the hospital. And he says, no, he's shaking his head no. And finally I said, I'm sure this is so much greater than anything ordinary. And I hear the words, no health insurance. So of course, immediately I called the ambulance and they saved his life. But it was a very close call. So it's a disaster. And what happens generally when people don't have health insurance, they either don't get health care or they can't afford the drugs that they're supposed to be taking to manage a condition. They often end up in the emergency room, but there is no magical solution if we allow Medicaid to be eviscerated. So let's not allow that to happen. That's why we need to put a knife through the heart of this bill and then put it in the deepest part of the ocean so it can never resurface. Amy from YouTube says, how will you educate Republican senators who say they oppose Medicaid cuts, but support work reporting requirements, which cut millions who work or are exempt? So the whole change in how you sign up for Medicaid is designed to make it extremely difficult. Think of about a doorway, which then you take red tape and you crisscross it, the door with so much red tape, nobody can get through the doorway. That's what they're trying to do. Now, it's not a strategy to say, hey, we think that this will encourage people to work, because we already know that people try to work. They want to be more affluent than they are, and they want to have income and the benefits that go with working. We've already had an example in Georgia where this red tape was applied to expanded Medicaid. And you know how many people got signed up in a state the size of Georgia, where maybe 100,000 might have been eligible or more? Like 4,500 people, just a few thousand. It was a complete failure, because what happens if you don't have health care? Well, the answer is you can't get well enough to work. And so it does the opposite of what they say. And plus, they're saying you have to reapply every 6 months. And I was just told today that in some cases, you'd have to reapply every month. Are you kidding me? Picture the mother who's working 2 part-time jobs where the schedule's always conflicting, and she's trying to get home so that she doesn't have kids or getting back to the house after school without her there. And in the process of all of that, she's supposed to reapply continuously and track that. No, this is absolutely the opposite. Please tell the Republicans, are you really the party that wants to cut red tape? Then why are you voting for this bill, deliberately creating massive red tape for folks who are already pressed against the wall? It's not as if they have special assistants like the rich have, who can spend days on the phone and days looking up the right forms and days visiting offices to get signed up. No, it's people who don't have that type of space because they are pressed against the wall. So tell our Republican colleagues, if you're really against red tape, the folks who should most benefit from cutting red tape would be those who are less affluent. And you're doing the opposite. What you're doing is wrong. What you're doing is cruel. We know what you're up to. You're not about supporting work. because we already have the experiment in Georgia. We know that doesn't work. This is about preventing desperate people from being able to keep health insurance, and they won't have it when they need it. And now we have an individual from Instagram who's saying, what's being done to protect PBS and NPR? Well, so in the bill, they have inserted policy provisions. And those policy provisions come out if they don't, are they primarily about policy or primarily about the budget? If they're primarily about the budget, about revenue and spending, they can stay in. They're primarily about policy, they have to come out. That's the Byrd rule, named after Robert Byrd of West Virginia, because reconciliation was a special fast track to consider initially, and for 22 years, this is what it did, could only be used to lower the deficit. And then the Republicans proceeded in 1996, 22 years later, to do a nuclear option, in which they said, hey, we want this filibuster-free pathway not to reduce the deficit, but to increase it. And because they wanted to do tax cuts for the richest Americans. So they blew up the fiscally responsible, 100 senators voted for it, 1974 bill, and repurposed it to increase the deficit and the debt, therefore, by giving tax breaks to the richest Americans. So the question that is going to be wrestled with on the Senate side, because this doesn't apply in the House of Representatives, is this provision about defunding PBS and National Public Radio, public broadcasting, is it primarily about policy because folks don't believe that we should have a publicly funded media? Or is it primarily about saving the money that we currently invest? Well, we're certainly going to be making the argument. It's primarily about policy, and it needs to come out. So we'll make that effort. If we can get it out, great. If we don't get it out, and it's a balancing test in the hands of the parliamentarian, well, then we have to tear down the whole bill for all the other reasons we're tearing down the whole bill. All the other reasons we're trying to put a stake through the heart of this bill or a knife into the heart of this bill, because that's the way we will protect PBS and NPR. It has been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you all for being engaged and taking on this big, beautiful betrayal. With your help, pressing from the outside, advocates inside the building, those of us who are in the Senate fighting for working Americans, who understand this is a families lose, billionaires win bill. We're carrying the fight, but the real effectiveness is when there's an inside force and an outside force, like all of you. So give your Republican House members and your Republican senators a hard time about them creating red tape on the poorest Americans. Give them a hard time about funding tax benefits for the richest Americans by leaving millions of children hungry. Give them a hard time about stripping healthcare from 16 million individuals. It's a lot of families, a lot of people, recognizing that not only will people suffer more from the disease, from an inability to afford their meds, inability to afford go to the doctor for medical treatments, but an estimated 50,000 a year will die because of those increased healthcare conditions. So this is a life and death issue. It's healthcare should be a right, not a privilege of being affluent. Let's kill this bill working together. And now I'm pleased to hand it over to Mark Warner. We came into the Senate together some 17 years ago. He leads the Intel side for the Democrats, contributes on every other fundamental policy that we're engaged in to help make the world better through healthcare, housing, and good education. Mark Warner.
Well, hey, everybody. Thank you so much. I want to really thank my friend Jeff Merkley, who is literally at the lead on so many of these fights. And I want to get right to it. Anna on Facebook has asked, how can we protect people who are the most vulnerable? The over 8 million Americans who are most in need of healthcare coverage, who will be stopped from Medicaid as a result of this bill. And Anna, I got to tell you, it's actually, as Jeff just mentioned, it's more than 8 million. The estimates are closer to 13 to 14 million. And let's drill down for a minute on just the Medicaid losses. Who are those folks? They are folks, for example, in my state, over half the babies born in rural communities are on Medicaid. They could see those basic OBGYN rights disappear. It's a lot of kids who are special ed kids in all of our schools. Many of those special ed kids have their needs taken care of by Medicaid. They could lose those healthcare benefits as well. It's frankly, a lot of what's happening in this bill is not just on Medicaid, but it's food assistance. I think we would all agree that kids ought to go to school not on an empty stomach, but this bill would literally cut food assistance for school breakfasts, school lunches, and then if you had to add on cruelty just for the sake of gratuitous cruelty, this legislation also cuts food banks. Now, let's not only throw you off of your healthcare needs, let's make it more difficult for folks in rural America to find a hospital that will help them with OBGYN needs. Let's not only take on school lunches, but then let's go ahead and cut food banks as well. We're a better country than this. Let me just add one other thing, Anna, that hasn't gotten as much attention. There may be some people that says, well, I actually buy my health insurance through the exchange, the healthcare exchange that was created out of Obamacare, where small businesses, individuals, a lot of folks who are gig workers, a lot of folks who are performers, they go to the healthcare exchange. And the question is, what's happened with those folks is they have decreased dramatically the premium support for folks who buy their health insurance through these exchanges. And you will see people that are making 60 grand a year, but they might have $700, $800, or $900 healthcare premium increases, even in the private marketplace, if this bill passes. So it is obviously awful for the most vulnerable Americans, but there's an awful lot of working middle-class Americans who will be hurt by this as well. I want to take a question from Alex Casio. It's a very good question. Procedurally, what can be filibustered? And can the filibuster be used to stop this bill? Unfortunately, Alex, the answer is no. And the reason is, and this will make, for those of you who kind of scratch your head and saying, that doesn't make sense. Well, let me explain. Literally back, I think it was in the 70s, it was the 80s, there was a legislation passed that called budget reconciliation. And this was when our debt was not at 37 trillion. It was a much smaller amount. And then, a guy named Robert Byrd, the senator from West Virginia, said, we ought to be able to, if we can actually cut the debt or cut the deficit, we ought to have a special procedure that you can get 51 votes on and not have to get the full filibuster at 60. Well, the craziness is that budget reconciliation process, which is supposed to be about lowering the deficit and the debt, has been changed around so much that this big ugly bill that is unfair and dreadful for everyone in this country, they're trying to use that budget reconciliation process. Now, there are certain provisions in this bill that don't touch the actual numbers, like I just talked about Medicaid, that may get thrown out, like some of this awful things that says that a court injunctive order can't be used across the country. That could get thrown out. There are some, there's a restriction in this bill that came over from the House that said no state should be able to do any artificial intelligence regulations. Do you really want to have the kind of potential abuse of non-consensual images or a young person's face put on a body that's not their own on an AI tool? Well, this bill is currently stated would preclude any state from saying, hey, even if the feds aren't going to regulate AI, we are. Now, our hope is that will be thrown out. It's actually even called the bird bath, BYRD, named after the senator who put this whole process together. But on these core financial issues, it really can get by with 51 votes. Now, there are 53 Republican senators, and then you've got the vice president. So all we need is to get 4 to 5 Republican senators to say, and many of them are saying privately, oh gosh, I think this is awful. Well, we need them not to just say privately to me or to other senators, this is awful. They need to actually vote their conscience. And this is why I would echo what Senator Merkley said. You know, even if you live in a state with Democratic senators, you've got probably some Republican House members. You've got to make them reconsider, because the procedural will end up being, if the Senate is able to pass this bill, it will be changed. It will have to go back to the House. And remember, this bill passed in the House only by 1 vote. So even if you got a state with Democratic senators, go to your Republican House members and let's elevate the issue of how awful this is. I want to get somebody a question now from Sawyer Hackett's audience member, Mike. Have heard the tax bill will raise prices. If it will, how much will it cost me? Well, there's a couple of different ways we're going to see price increase. Remember, Trump got elected because folks thought grocery prices were going up too much. And obviously, we've seen nothing really lower prices from this president. If anything, his tariff policy has actually increased prices. And I think you will see those tariff policies as they really hit closer to the end of June, because again, some of those policies haven't really taken effect because there were things that were shipped before the tariffs got in place. But all of that shipping is kind of have gone through the system. So most economists say starting right after June, you're going to see dramatic price increases. Now, the bill itself, how will it raise prices? Well, it's going to raise healthcare costs, because if you cut out Medicaid, and then if you say to the private insurance market, those people who get, even insurance premiums, their prices will go up, and that will disrupt the whole healthcare market. So you can say, well, gosh, I'm making, $150,000, my family, I'm going to be okay. I get private health insurance. This bill will so disrupt the whole healthcare pricing system that you will see healthcare costs go up dramatically. And that's even before, Mike, one of the things that's so darn unfair, this bill literally, if you are making minimum wage in America, and most people are working minimum wage, they got to work not 1, but oftentimes 2 jobs. If you're making minimum wage in America, your taxes from this bill will go up 53%. No matter what they say otherwise, we got plenty of data that shows they'll go up 53%. People at the very top, that top tenth of 1%, on average, are going to get $188,000 tax cut. Now, listen, I was lucky to do well in business before I got involved in politics. I got no problem with people who take a risk getting rewarded, but there ought to be a fairness to our system. And if you're blessed to do well, paying your fair share ought to be part of that contribution and obligation we have as Americans. What is not fair is to say that folks who are making minimum wage are going to see their taxes go dramatically up, and that the richest people in America are going to have on average $188,000 tax cut. That's just not fair or right. So Mike, thanks for asking that question. Xavier from Instagram is saying, what can we do as citizens? Let your voices be heard. And part of this means, Xavier, we got to have hard conversations. I think sometimes too much we get in our own kind of little silos and just talk to people that agree with us. I don't know you, but I don't know many Americans, and including myself, that don't have family members or friends or others who voted for Trump or voted for some of these Republican senators. And you need to say, is this really what you wanted? Did you want, a place where the most vulnerable Americans lose their health care? Do you really want kids going to school hungry? Do you really want food banks cut? Do you really want to have a tax code that even pushes more money to folks at the top and takes people at minimum wage and pushes them their taxes up by 53%? So I think if we can have people that maybe supported Trump come out and say, hey, this is not what I bargained for. And as specifically as a citizen, one of the things I'd also urge you to do is where you can say, well, my congressman, my senator may vote for this. Well, let your local Republican elected officials happen. This is only happening with one team. Those of us who are Democrats, we can raise our voices. We are making our case, but this is all being driven by our Republican friends. They need to hear from that local school board member, that local city council member, that local state legislator that's a Republican, that this is going to be bad for everyone. Last question from Kate Barr. This bill will have a huge impact on rural communities. And this is exactly what I say. The same communities who voted for Trump. Well, one of the things I've always done is I don't leave behind any part of my state. I got wide swaths of Southwest and Southside Virginia that are as rural as any place in America. I am down there all the time saying, hey, we got wide swaths of my state that there's not a rural hospital around, or if there's a rural hospital around, they don't have OBGYN services that can deliver a baby. You have this bill pass, you're going to have rural hospitals across America closed down. You're going to have even less services available. We've already seen these communities. I think about the fact that I've got about 4 or 5 big development projects that literally got awarded money before the end of the Biden administration from the IRA, the bill that did a lot of the energy tax credits. All that money's been frozen. They've already been screwed. So, in many ways, this bill has a bigger tendency to hit rural Americans than most. I want to now turn it over to somebody who really is kind of our quarterback on particularly the tax issues. It's my friend Ron Wyden from Oregon. He has been the chairman of the Finance Committee. When we made a lot of progress on healthcare, Ron Wyden was our leader. When we made a lot of progress on the IRA, on the clean energy tax credits, Ron Wyden is our leader. Ron Wyden is now the ranking member, but not the chairman. That is until we take back the Senate. But he is really the person that can dive as deep a details as you want on particularly the tax, finance, and Medicaid provisions of this awful bill. So let me turn it over to my dear friend from Oregon, Ron Wyden.
What a great way to start, because the bill that got through the House, of course, was just down to that one vote. And I tell you, we're going to win this one because we Democrats go to the grassroots. We understand that political change hardly ever is top down. We believe it's grassroots up. And we've been spending our day working, for example, on exposing the flaws in the House healthcare package. It's a huge gift to special interests, and the reality, is that, we believe what they're trying to do in the House is make choices that are against the needs of working families in terms of healthcare and energy, and they're basically getting all the breaks to the people at the top. And if we get this out, we're going to prevail. And the reality is, Maureen is asking about whether it's going to add $2 trillion to the deficit. Maureen, we think it'll be adding more. In terms of debt, this is a wrecking ball. It's a wrecking ball for working families. The question was, how can they cut anything with Medicare if we pay premiums for our coverage? Well, the reality is that Medicare is a program because so many seniors, rely on it. We've got to have as much cost containment as we possibly can. And these guys don't want to do anything to contain that cost. For example, we're against, upcoding, which is something where the insurance companies basically say you're sicker than you actually are. And the reality is that Medicare in particular, if you look at these kinds of programs, has got to have cost containment that at the same time ensures good care. And the Republicans are not making that possible. Question about the food distribution programs. The food distribution programs are going to get clobbered. And I think I'm even more concerned about them than I am some of the healthcare programs, because we've gotten so much coverage with respect to Medicaid. I think the Republicans are going to be saying to themselves, we better give a little bit on it. I think they're going to try and hide the food distribution cuts, and I think they're going to be massive. And particularly if you talk about kids and seniors, what happens is if they don't get a good diet, very often they get sick, and then they end up being much more challenging in terms of getting health care. What we ought to be doing is making it possible for vulnerable kids and disabled folks and seniors to be able to get affordable nutrition and be in a position to stay healthy. What will happen when people lose SNAP and Medicare? The true cuts won't happen until 2028. I think we're going to start seeing real pain, next year. Healthcare is a $5 trillion enterprise and doesn't move that quickly. And I think we're going to begin, if the Republicans were to pass the House bill, and we're going to make sure that they don't, we're going to be pulling out all the stops to get a better shake for seniors and the disabled and working families. I think we'd start seeing some of the effects next year. We would certainly see, apropos of your very good question, there's going to be a $500 billion cut in Medicare. That could be kicking in early next year in terms of providers in rural areas. What are you most afraid of in this bill? What I'm afraid of is that all the cuts are coming from seniors, kids, the disabled, and it's all going to benefit the people at the very top. As Senator Warner said and introduced me in a very inflationary way, I'm the point person for the Democrats on taxes. We Democrats want a tax bill that gives everybody in America the chance to get ahead. That's what we think is America at its best. The Republicans don't favor that. They want the tax breaks for the people at the top. Question was, could tax benefits for American manufacturing replace tariffs? You're being way too logical, Nancy. I've said that for quite some time. For example, with the big pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer paid virtually no taxes over a period in the last few years, and basically they just figured out how to do business overseas and duck paying taxes in the United States. And my concern is that we ought to have tax benefits creating opportunities for more high-skill, high-wage jobs rather than tariffs that make it hard for the middle class to pay for essentials. And by the way, those tariffs that hurt the middle class mean that they're going to find more things unaffordable, and that hurts the economy and them. Question was about SSI disability for epilepsy. I'm curious as to what's going to happen to disabled folks. I think disabled folks are also going to get hit very hard. There's so many disabled folks that would just like the opportunity to get more chances to work, to get ahead, and be in a position to help themselves. And what these cuts in disability benefits are going to do is take away all of those kinds of opportunities. How will cuts to Medicaid hurt special education teachers? Well, what we know is that a lot of the folks who are benefiting from special education from the teachers and the families. They depend on Medicaid. Medicaid is a lifeline for them, and you make cuts to Medicaid, that's going to make the whole special education initiative much harder and much harder to get the dollars out in an effective way. So now we have one of my favorite colleagues. He's somebody who I got to know years back when he was in the House of Representatives. He's been a leader in the Senate in terms of a smart foreign policy. He's particularly knowledgeable about taxes. He's always coming to us on the Finance Committee with good ideas. He's an appropriator, so the fact is the appropriator and the Finance Committee have got to work together on healthcare issues. So it's a pleasure to be able to introduce Senator Van Hollen now. Thanks, bud.
Well, it's great to be with everybody. Thanks for joining us, and it's good to see my friend Ron Wyden. But why don't we just jump right in? So Jen from Facebook asks, will these budget cuts affect me even though I live in a blue state? Well, the answer is yes, absolutely. This is national legislation that will impact everybody in the United States and will harm everybody in the United States. And the whole idea here is to provide very big tax cuts to billionaires and very wealthy people at the expense of everybody else, regardless of what state you live in, red state, blue state, purple state. It will hit everybody because the reality is that when you cut, for example, Medicaid or food and nutrition programs, that impacts people, harms people in every state. So this is a very bad news bill. And again, on top of the cuts that will be made, it's also going to dramatically increase our national deficits and debt. The Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan entity, they're kind of like the umpire in the baseball game. They call balls and strikes. They said that this would increase our debt and deficit by $2.4 trillion just over the next 10 years. And in the process, they indicated that about 11 million Americans will lose access to affordable health care. So you can see the choices that Republicans are making as part of this reconciliation bill. So we have another question from Cyan Bloom's audience question. The current funding bill impacts IDEA funds originally meant to support children with disabilities. What are you doing to protect children with disabilities? How are you organizing with your fellow congressional colleagues to flip votes against this bill in the Senate? There's absolutely no doubt that the Republican bill will do dramatic harm to individuals with disabilities. The primary way it will impact them is through the Medicaid cuts, because Medicaid is a program that definitely benefits individuals with disabilities. There are three main categories of people who Medicaid is important to are: number one, seniors in nursing homes; number two, individuals with disabilities; and number three, lower income families who can't afford health insurance. And so when you go after those programs, you are, according to the Congressional Budget Office, hitting about 11 million Americans who are going to lose access to that care. With respect to IDEA funds, this is a program that I've fought for my entire time in public service. In fact, IDEA is already underfunded. What do I mean by that? I mean that current law that was put in place a long time ago promised that the federal government would pick up 40% of the costs of IDEA. As we speak here, the federal government's only picking up about 16% of those costs. So I've introduced legislation that would mandate full federal funding of IDEA. That's really what we need to do, as opposed to this legislation, which together with the Republican budget will do great harm to IDEA, including the budget. Next question, Jeremy from Instagram. What's going to happen to EBT, electronic benefit transfers? So what they do is they do go after food and nutrition programs. They cut those very dramatically, about 200 billion, 300 billion in cuts. What that means is that families who obviously need access to the programs just to put food on the table, these are people who are living paycheck to paycheck, will be hit. And I should say that a lot of people are going to be hit multiple times by these cuts, right? So, for example, if you're somebody who's had their health care taken away, you're also going to have, less support from the SNAP program, the food and nutrition programs, and you're also going to be hit by their efforts to take away, for example, the LIHEAP program, which is a program designed to help people with their energy bills. So this is going to hurt people across the board. In terms of the electronic benefit transfer, I don't know if this has any specific impact on that mechanism, but what I do know is that it will do you a lot less good to have EBT if you no longer have funding for the SNAP program to begin with. So we have a question from Sawyer Hackett's audience. What part of the bill is no one talking about, but people should know? That's a good question because there are so many bad things in this bill. I do want to mention one provision that's gotten a little bit of attention, but not enough, which is they snuck into this bill a provision that essentially would prohibit judges and courts from enforcing decisions in the event that the Trump administration doesn't comply with a court order. So, for example, if you defy a court order, judges should be able to sanction the Trump administration lawyers. But they've essentially taken away funding that would allow you to do that. Now, we strongly believe that that violates the rules in the Senate regarding the reconciliation procedure. We strongly believe we will be able to take that out, but it is important to realize the lengths to which they will go to try to prevent courts from holding the Trump administration accountable. Another provision like that would actually put a 10-year moratorium on any state regulation of AI. Again, this would be, in my view, a big mistake. We need to establish some rules of the road at the national level on AI, and if you prevent states from doing it, you take off the pressure of doing this at the federal level. So those are a couple of provisions that haven't gotten a lot of attention, but we hope to be able to get rejected out of the bill through the process in the Senate. We're going to the next one. So Rachel Bender's audience, will it affect education or school budgets? So this particular bill, the reconciliation bill, will not directly impact school budgets, but education school budget. But I want to hasten to add, there's a parallel process going on, which is the whole budget submission from the Trump administration. And if you look at that, yes, you're going to see significant cuts, unfortunately, to important education programs. And of course, as part of their plan, they want to literally eliminate the entire federal Department of Education. So if you look at these things together, it will dramatically undermine our ability to provide federal support for our kids' education. And we need to stop both the efforts, their efforts on the budget and also on the reconciliation bill. Now I'm very pleased to see that my friend is in the room, Senator Schatz from Hawaii, who's a really essential part of our Democratic caucus, a great leader, and he's going to take over to answer some questions now. But thank again all of you for joining us, and thank you for being in this fight, because we have to remember that back in 2017, when there was an effort to destroy the Affordable Care Act, it was because, like, people who are tuning in right now rallied. We were able ultimately to defeat their effort to destroy the Affordable Care Act, but by only one vote in the United States Senate. So we're going to need to work together to defeat this bill now. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Senator Brian Schatz.
All right. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to thank you for tuning in, and I want to reiterate what Chris just said. Look, I think we can kill this bill. And I think that we should not get too fancy with our thinking and our strategy. The objective here is not to improve this bill. It can't be improved. There's nothing that's worth doing inside of it. It raises the debt and it increases prices for everybody, all in the name of increasing or decreasing taxes for people making $4 million a year or more. So the first question, who loses their Medicaid in this bill? Look, the estimates I've seen are around 14 million people getting kicked off Medicaid. But the other thing I kind of want to point out here is that it has a big secondary effect. Even if you're not personally on Medicaid, it screws up the revenue stream, especially for rural hospitals and clinics. But any healthcare provider that has a payer mix, right? So a composition of payers that includes a big chunk of Medicaid, they're going to lose a big chunk of their revenue. And so if you're a big provider, you can probably sustain the cut. You just provide way less in the way of service to the community. But there are a bunch of, especially rural hospitals, that are always on the edge of shutting down anyway, and they will. So even if you're not on Medicaid, if you're in a place where the main hospital or clinic depends on Medicaid, you're also going to get screwed by this bill. And then the premium support problem is huge. A lot of people have no idea how much their individual healthcare plans are being subsidized. So a lot of people are going to pay like $500 more per individual per month. And if you're on a family plan, it's going to be 10 grand more a year. There's a bunch of us who remember how expensive healthcare was pre-Obamacare. And for as screwed up as our healthcare system remains, it is still a hell of a lot cheaper to go on the exchange and get some kind of plan. This will blow that up for another several million Americans. And so everybody loses for this bill and very few people benefit. Is it possible? This is Polly from Instagram. This is a question I ask myself like almost on the daily. Is it possible to fix what Elon and Doge and Trump have done to agencies? Of course it is. Now, how quickly that can be done, I think depends on the agency. There are some agencies that can snap back to, operating in the normal fashion. I think, this is a small example, so I don't want you to think I'm only tracking this, but the U.S. Institute for Peace was basically illegally shuttered. They brought in U.S. It was nuts. It was complete, emerging autocracy stuff. They finally abided by the court order, and the U.S. Agency for Peace is starting to operate as normal. Now, they did find a bunch of drugs and drug paraphernalia all throughout the offices. So there's like a physical aspect of things being left in a shambles, but also administratively and money-wise. So I'm not like overly optimistic that it'll snap right back into, working very well. But I think we have to believe enough in the American experiment to believe that once we get back to a more normal political environment, that these agencies can be fixed. Now, I just want to add one thing. The Democratic Party cannot be the party of everything is fine and everything is already working fine. So some of these agencies actually do need to modernize and reform, and we should be in on that project and leading that project. And that is sort of in opposition to let's just go in and light the place on fire. People are smart enough to know the difference, right? Between someone who wants to actually reform agencies, modernize agencies, make them work for actual people, and someone who says, government is not working as well as it should be, so why don't we make it work even less well? So, but I do think we have to articulate that we understand things are not perfect as they were 6 months ago and commit ourselves to that kind of change, but lawful change, logical change, and a kind of an approach to things that understands that these are serious enterprises. They do serious things, and you can't light them on fire and expect them to recover. Well, please talk to us about what y'all will do to protect our government employees. You know, one of the things that I promised myself after the second Trump inauguration is I wouldn't give you BS about where our powers are. And I actually think the tools to protect government employees are mostly in existing law. And you may or may not know that Trump has lost close to 96% of all lawsuits, and that includes a substantial portion of them that have to do with civil service and collective bargaining and other rights that our federal employees have. So most of what is happening is illegal already. We do not need a new law. We need the current law to be enforced. Okay, Katie from Instagram. Hi, Senator Schatz. How will this bill impact Native communities? It's mostly the Medicaid cuts that make me the most nervous for Native communities. But, you know, Native communities, not everyone, but many are extremely sensitive to cuts in public services. So you may not know that, especially on tribal lands, the FBI is often the primary source of law enforcement and public safety and security. So that's an aspect, but mostly it's going to be Medicaid and what that does to rural hospitals, but in particular, Indian Health Service hospitals. Anna on Instagram, how do Republicans justify increasing our spending and deficit to fund inhumane deportations versus healthcare and food for Americans and the world through USAID? They don't even bother. I mean, let's be honest, they don't bother. They're not troubled by trying to be like consistent ideologically or intellectually. This whole enterprise is very simple. They are increasing your costs, right? Your healthcare costs, your grocery costs, your retail costs, your electricity costs, right? And what are they going to do with that money? Well, they need to find a pay for, which is a fancy way of saying they need money for the purpose of cutting taxes for the wealthiest corporations that have ever existed on planet Earth and people making more than $4 million a year. So I'm not going to make their arguments for them, but I'll also say they're not even really making their arguments themselves. They're just kind of shrugging their shoulders and lying about it. And I'll take one last question and then turn it over to my dear friend, and not, although he's new to the Senate, my now mentor, Peter Welch from the state of Vermont. I'm a big fan of anyone who has, been the Senate president in a local legislature. I think that's harder than anything we do up here in the Congress. Okay, last question. What are you most angry about on this bill? It is the Medicaid cuts. Well, okay. I know you said, what am I most angry about? I'll give you two things. It's the Medicaid cuts because I just know people on Medicaid and I visit rural hospitals and I know how much this is going to crush both individuals and the institutions that serve, some of the folks that need healthcare the most. But I think the cherry on top of the sundae that makes this the absolute worst is that this money is not to pay down the deficit. This money is not for some, we're not at war trying to fight fascism and we need to find revenue everywhere we can. This isn't to reform the system. This isn't to invest in education or try to buy down the debt. This is simply to cut taxes for people making more than $4 million. And before I give it over to Peter, I just want to say, we can win this thing. This last couple of days have been pretty rocky for the Republicans. And so I don't want you to give up hope. There are some instances where I don't think we're going to win and all we can do is raise our voices and maybe sue and see what happens in the next election. This is not one of those times. We can actually win this damn thing. So I'll be back in about a half an hour to take a couple more questions. But here's Peter Welch. Come on in.
How do we do it? What? What? Oh, hi. How are you? Peter Welch here. So the question is, how will this bill hurt our farmers? I'm getting the hang of it really badly. Okay. First of all, our farmers are getting hurt with the tariffs immediately and everywhere. So for instance, I'm in Vermont and our farmers, a lot of whom voted for Trump, by the way, these tariffs mean every one of them has to pay 25% more for fertilizer, and they get that from Canada. And I went to Canada last week with a Republican from North Dakota, Kevin Kramer, and his farmers are getting hit the same way. So that is something that the tariffs hit. Second, in this bill, the promises that were made to farmers who did things on their farm to improve soil, to protect stream banks and water quality, agreed with the government that they would go borrow money and do the work to make their soil better, to make their water cleaner. And then the government under the IRA was going to pay them back. So I have farmers who literally did this, went out, borrowed the money, did the work, and now this money is being repealed in this bill. So farmers are literally getting stiffed. And by the way, that's farmers, whether they were in states that voted for Trump or they voted for Harris. You know, there's a bipartisanship in this bill, but the bipartisanship is pain is being inflicted on everyone, no matter who you voted for. But I really feel for the farmers because they got hit with the tariffs and they're hit with the pullback and support. Well, how do we get the no contempt clause? Sawyer Hackett's audience is asking, how do we get the no contempt clause out of the bill with no Republican support? I think we can do it. And the reason we can is it has nothing to do with what's called the reconciliation process. And that's gobbledygook, but basically reconciliation means that instead of having to get 60 votes, they maneuver this so they only get 50. But in order for them, they're limited on what they can have in this bill, and it has to have some impact on the budget. And my expectation is that the Senate parliamentarian will rule that this no contempt clause has nothing to do with the budget. It's just a wish list for the Republicans. So we're going to have to make a point of order, and we're going to. And I have confidence that the parliamentarian will say this is out of bounds. Lisa on Instagram, what can be done to bring back research funding? Well, I go back to what Senator Schatz was saying. We've got to win this fight. In this bill, the best thing we can do is kill it, okay? Because everything in this bill is just bad for you. It's bad for me. It increases the deficit. It takes away healthcare benefits. It takes away food right off the tables of families who desperately need it. But there's nothing in here on the research. So this is a fight that totally mystifies me, because a hallmark of a confident country is it invests in science, it invests in health funding research, and it comes up as a result with cures, with better treatments. And that's been a bipartisan commitment. You know, who's against it? Well, it turns out Trump and MAGA is against it. In this bill, we're not going to have a chance to be able to bring back the funding. But the commitment that so many of us have made with the total support of folks who sent us here, and by the way, a lot of Republicans, we want to get our scientific funding back, our medical research funding back, but that is an ongoing fight. David on Facebook, is Trump trying to interfere with states' rights to regulate air quality? And what are you doing to protect industry regulations that hold polluters accountable? Well, David, you nailed it. Trump is trying to interfere with states' rights to regulate air. He's trying to interfere with Congress's rights to regulate air quality. And we see that with what just recently happened when the Senate, and really a Republican-led Senate, is voting to take away the California air quality standards, which have been a leader, and by the way, adopted by my state of Vermont. So they're full speed ahead. You know, their energy policy is everything below and nothing above. is all fossil fuels. And it's astonishing to me that the Trump administration is absolutely destroying incentives that are starting to help us move to a clean energy economy. And they're disregarding the fact that a lot of the new generation of electricity, and we know we need a lot more electricity, it's been from wind and solar. So we have jobs that are in the process of being created that are all being jeopardized. And every single one of us on the Democratic side is going to the floor, protesting, voting no, and trying to highlight the actions the administration is taking that are going to make your air quality terrible. From YouTube, what are the real world effects of exploding the deficit to pay for these tax cuts? And how will a larger deficit affect me and my family? That is such a good question, right? This is going to add 2.4 trillion at a minimum to the deficit. Add to that, the tariffs are going to cost taxpayers about 2.6 trillion, okay? So you have this big hit that's going to make the week-to-week, month-to-month income for folks, for Vermonters and folks around the country smaller. And what it means with the deficit going up is that interest rates are starting to go up. So right now, the biggest expenditure of your tax dollars is on paying down the debt, the money we borrow with treasury bills to pay the debt. Interest rates go up. It's billions and billions of dollars if the interest rate just goes up 0.1% of 1%. So we're spending more in interest than we spend on Medicare, more than we spend on even the military. So it's going to hurt us and it's going to contract the economy. Very, very damaging. As far as you and your family, if you're trying to get a mortgage, higher interest rate. If you're a small business and you want to borrow money to expand, higher interest rate. So this actually is an aspect of this bill that I think needs more and more attention. We've talked about the Medicaid cuts, and that has enormous detrimental impact on a family. But the higher interest rates have a huge negative impact on the whole economy. I am going to say goodbye, and I love doing this. It's great, fantastic questions. We've got to be engaged. We've got to hang in. Brian, at the end of his presentation, he said, this is a fight we can win. We got to kill this bill. Elon Musk is on our side. So we're going to do that. And here following me is my friend from Connecticut, Senator Richard Blumenthal. He never looks tired no matter how hard he works. But he just got back from Ukraine, and he has been there dozens of times. I don't know how many, he can tell you. But I so respect him for many reasons, but for being our leader on having us stick with Zelensky and stick with Ukraine, especially after that extraordinary attack that the Ukrainians managed on those Russian bombers. So here's Senator Blumenthal. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut. Very honored to follow my good friend, Peter Welch, and I'm going to try to do half the job that he did in answering your questions. And let me answer that first question. What am I personally most angry about? Republicans trying to sneak in this bill? The cuts on Medicaid are such treachery, such a betrayal. And the results are so impactful. We're talking here not about technical change, but about depriving people of health care. What is more basic? The old saying, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. Kids really can't learn when they are in pain or when they're sick. People can't work effectively if they are worried about their health, let alone actually suffering from some illness. And tragically, not only will 16 million Americans become uninsured as a result of Republican cuts, but people will die. 51 11,000 preventable deaths each year will be caused by this bill. And in fact, more than 11,000 of those deaths will be due to the loss of Medicaid and Affordable Care Act coverage. That is an indictment. It is criminal. I used to be a prosecutor, United States Attorney for Connecticut and Attorney General for the state of Connecticut. And literally, this kind of draconian, cruel, dumb action is criminal in a metaphorical sense, if not in a real sense as criminal negligence. Cutting Medicare, how does it make people richer? Well, it doesn't make richer the people whose Medicare is cut, but it does make richer the people whose taxes are reduced as part of a conscious and purposeful strategy to disembowel Medicare, dismantle it, and use the proceeds from that dismantling, cutting it, to provide for the financial wherewithal to cut taxes. That's how it makes the rich richer. It doesn't make middle class or lower income people richer. In fact, it undermines the middle class. And so, in effect, Medicare cuts make the billionaires and ultra wealthy richer. The next question concerns blocking states from regulating AI. So glad this question has been raised. I come from a state, Connecticut, where we are trying to put in place some safeguards and guardrails on AI. People understand that AI has enormous promise. It can do great things in detecting illnesses from the kind of radiology that can be done. It has great potential to develop new cures. It can be a boon in the workplace, but it also can have enormous negative impacts. And so some kind of federal regulation is appropriate. In fact, I think necessary. I developed a framework with Senator Hawley for federal regulation. In the meantime, states should be able, legally, to do their own safeguards. And the risks in blocking states from regulating AI while federal protections are being developed, hopefully they'll be here soon, but there's nothing on the legislative horizon introduced as viable legislation to provide federal regulation. It's unchecked surveillance is right, bias, right? Other harms, including the kind of deep fakes and impersonations that can literally tear apart people's lives. And so this provision, which is in the bill, and a lot of legislators in the House didn't even know about, has powerful ramifications that are negative for people if it allows that kind of harm to go forward. And I really appreciate Sean for that question. I've been in the Senate for close to 15 years. You may think that's a long time. In Senate timeframes, it isn't necessarily. In fact, I'm not one of the most senior members in the United States Senate. And I will answer your question very directly. Are any of my Republican colleagues raising concerns? Their constituents are going to be hit hard. They're concerned, but they're not willing to stand up to Donald Trump. They know the negative impacts of this legislation, but they have no backbone. They need to grow a spine and recognize that their duty is to their constituents, as your question implies, not to the Donald Trump cult, not to the apprehension about primaries brought by MAGA diehards. not to Elon Musk, who is behind a lot of these cuts that hit their constituents hard. They need to get their priorities straight and make sure that they stand on principle. And thank you, Jen. Joanne, your question about what we can see exactly what Medicaid benefits look like now and what are taken away. We certainly know what they are now, and we know what Medicare are now. And they are intertwined. There's no question about it. Medicaid, as you know, applies to not only people with disabilities, children and families, but also to seniors with the income provisions that are in place. And with Medicare, obviously, there is an age cutoff. So I think the two are definitely intertwined because some may be covered by both. And benefits are going to be taken away from Medicaid recipients, for example, if they fail to comply with the work requirement, paperwork requirements. So the bill will affect those using these benefits by constricting their availability. How can you help? Raise your voices. Go to rallies, town meetings, write, email, text, people who have influence, as well as members of Congress, and reach out to your colleagues in professional organizations, especially if they are MAGA sympathizers and Republicans. Make sure that you are fully engaged, and maybe most important, engaged in elections. Elections count. They have consequences. We hear a lot about people wanting to help, and that is great. It's energizing. At the end of the day, every single election counts. Even local elections can send a message. They're the building blocks for the future. And so I can't say often enough, raise your voice, be heard. You're making a difference, and especially when it comes to supporting candidates. And also, let me have the temerity to suggest, become a candidate yourself. Anybody can, and even if you think you can't do it, believe me, you can. If I can do it, you can do it. And on that note, let me introduce somebody who is a great public servant as well as a great candidate, my friend and colleague, Brian Schatz.
Hey, you guys, I'm back. Thanks to Dick Blumenthal for his great leadership. I want to reiterate what Senator Blumenthal said. You know, we can win this one. Sometimes in the Trump era, they won the House and the Senate. We just got to fight the fight. Sometimes the fight is elsewhere. It's, you know, in the courts or some other venue. But this is the most important fight. Whatever it is that you care about, in addition to this, it is important to understand that as a strategic matter, the most important thing that we can all collectively focus on is getting the word out about how rotten this bill is. And the thing that's kind of alarming to me, you know, in addition to the substance of the bill, is that like only 1 in 4 Americans actually understand how bad this bill is on the healthcare side, what it's going to do to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. Okay, I got a question from somebody on Facebook. Can you clarify why Dems can't filibuster this procedurally? I'm going to answer this as quickly as I can and try not to lose any viewers. The short version is this is a budget process. that is one of the very few things you can do in the Senate that is subject to a bare majority vote. So regular legislation, you need 60 votes, but because this is a bill that either increases or decreases the deficit, and it certainly increases the deficit, but if it does anything to the deficit, then it is subject to this weird, ridiculous process called reconciliation. Frankly, we use that for the American Rescue Plan and for the Inflation Reduction Act, so it is available to the majority if they've got the votes. So we can't filibuster. What we really need is 4 Republicans in the House or 4 Republicans in the Senate to kill the bill. And the only way we get that is if those people are more afraid of their constituents electorally than they are of Donald Trump. Next question. Mark from Facebook. Trump threatens people on social media, but now he's taking things too far. How will you guys help to keep judges safe and people trying to keep our democracy intact, like poll workers? It's a really important question. Look, I don't think we're going to enact any new laws to keep judges safe. I will say that when judges were threatened, I think it was during the Biden administration, we passed additional resources and penalties for threatening or harming members of the judiciary, and that should be a bipartisan principle. But obviously, Donald Trump is trying to move the line on what is considered fascist every day of the week. So again, I don't want to tell you I have a magic bullet here. I don't want to say bullet, a magic solution here. But fighting for the rule of law sort of outside of the Capitol is important. Trying to legislate inside of the Capitol is important. Supporting lawsuits is important. And, part of our job is actually to try to get some Republicans on board with where their red lines are. Okay, Amy from YouTube, technical question. Will the section trying to assign regulatory review to OMB go under the Byrd rule? Wow, that is a technical question. I don't know the answer to that because it has to do with what the parliamentarian rules. So I think I'm just going to give you my blunt answer, which is I just have no idea. My sense is no. That it will be removed from the bill, but I don't think we know what she's going to decide because the arguments haven't even been made. Oh yeah, can you please debunk the myth that they're only cutting migrant Medicaid? The only way you think that this is only cutting migrant Medicaid, not really migrant, I think you mean people who are illegally in the country, is if you think 14 million people are on Medicaid who are not citizens of the United States. Like, that's not plausible at all. What they are trying to do is increase the administrative burden, the paperwork burden, to the point where people just kind of like cycle out of the system. These are eligible people who can't figure out the paperwork, right? They are trying to do this with Social Security as well. But this is clearly a cut to Medicaid, and it is going to shut down rural hospitals, shut down rural clinics, and cause many, many people to lose their health care overall. Next, we have Sue on Facebook. So in HR 1, what about the provision that rejects the authority of the courts to hold government officials in contempt when they violate court orders? This would apply to all temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions, or permanent ones that have ever been issued. Yeah, this is outrageous. This is nuts. It's so bad that even Republicans in the House who voted for it are now saying like, whoops, I didn't know it was in there. I think that's bullshit. But to your basic question is what's going to happen with that? That I am very confident will be removed by the parliamentarian. It is not eligible for a 50 vote threshold. That is definitely a 60 voter. So lots of things to be pissed off about. I think you can still be pissed about that the House of Representatives would actually vote for this on the Republican side unanimously. But I don't think you have to worry that this will become law. What does this mean for my student loans? It sort of depends on your individual circumstances. So this, I feel like, I'm sorry to give you a vague answer, but whenever it comes to like an individual, like what does this mean for my personal situation? I'm sort of wary of offering advice over the internet. So I think it depends on everybody's individual situation, but I think it's fair to say that the current regime is hostile to students, to universities, and to subsidized student loans. what should we be paying the most attention to on this? Look, I think, here's my advice. I think there's a lot of stuff that, pisses people off. Like some people are particularly outraged at a ban on regulating AI for the next 10 years. And obviously somebody just talked about withholding money for the enforcement of temporary restraining orders and other court orders. Like those are all things to be really pissed off about. But I think the best way to kill this bill is to focus on the Medicaid cuts, the nutrition assistance cuts, and where the money is going towards. So, whenever it's time, and obviously I'm not doing electoral stuff on this, I'm in the government building, but whenever it's time to campaign for my own sake, I figure out what my record is and make sure everything we're talking about is true, but then we select the things that are most compelling to the voters, which may or may not be the things that are most compelling to me, the things that I am personally the most proud about, or the things that I'm the most interested in. It is okay in politics to talk about the most compelling thing that moves the most votes. And I'm telling you that of all the outrages, of all the things that you are pissed off about or worried about, that the thing that is most likely to kill this bill is this idea that they are raising prices on Americans on the healthcare side, on the grocery side, on the electricity side, in order to generate enough money to provide tax cuts for a bunch of people that most of us have never met. And so I think we need to have real discipline here as a party, sort of left, center left, leftist, everybody just talk about Medicaid cuts because it is unifying and it is by far the most compelling way to talk about this bill. In fact, there's so much crap in this bill that we could do ourselves a disservice where everyone picks their least favorite provision and then our message is muddled, right? And that's what they want. They are trying to flood the zone. So we have to say they're cutting your healthcare, they're raising your prices, and they are taking all the money out of your pocket and giving it to someone else. Is there anything that we can do to stop what's happening with the American people was the question. Yeah, we can kill this bill. We really can kill this bill. I'm not saying we're gonna kill this bill, but I am saying that it feels right now like it felt before the Affordable Care Act fight and before we won. It was one of those things where we were losing until we won, right? We did not think we had the votes. Even going into that evening, I was expecting that political parties, generally speaking, deliver for their presidents and that's how this was going to land. And that is not how this landed. And it wasn't, we tried we did everything. We fought like hell, and I thought we were pretty effective in that way. But when I say we, I'm not really talking about like me and Booker and Murphy. I'm talking about everybody in the world. The reason that the senior senator from Arizona, John McCain, went onto the floor and famously gave the thumbs down is because he was hearing from his constituents. And so if we're going to generate 4 no votes, it has to be through those constituents. There is no magic like speech I'm going to give or Facebook Live I'm going to do or cable hit or email or tweet that's sort of like some dagger to this bill. The only way this thing falls is if politicians make the judgment that they are quite afraid of what's going to happen to their constituents. Okay, Felicia on Facebook. How can we address the lack of protections on habeas corpus and what is going to happen with the personal data that was stolen from companies like Palantir? Look, I think that's a kind of a multi-tiered question. I could chew up more time than we have. This is one where the law is on our side and we don't need new legislation. And I kind of disagree with some of my, it's a friendly disagreement. It's not like I think they're terrible or they think I'm terrible. My view is when the law is being violated, that the solution is not a new law to say, hey, remember that old law? You got to enforce that law. These people are being unlawful, and what we need to do is enforce the law in court. It is definitely true that the administration has been sandbagging compliance, but for the most part, we have been winning in court. And for the most part, there has been slow, but meaningful compliance over time. And so I just don't want us to throw up our hands and say, well, it's all over and they're just going to defy court orders. The truth is they're not. They are in some instances. I think the El Salvador case is a particularly egregious example of Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem and Marco Rubio, all pretty close to the borderline of defying court orders. But for the most part, the Article 3 branch, the judiciary, has sort of stood up for democracy Even the judges that I voted against, even the judges that were appointed by Trump, are finding all of his conduct to be just too damn much. Oh, well, Miranda from Instagram, in all honesty, is there actually any hope the big budget bill will not pass? Look, I think this is one of the problems with the movement that I'm trying to help to solve, which is, I agree. If I thought we were just gonna lose, then I would be talking about this mostly in the context of raising our voices, or, politicians make choices and then they're accountable to the voters. We want to make this thing maximally unpopular so that they suffer, politically. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we still have a puncher's chance, probably not like a high likelihood, but not zero either, to kill this bill. So yes, there is actually a hope that this big, I forgot what they call it, this crappy budget bill will not pass. And my view is the strategy is the same. Try to kill the bill. And if the bill is going to pass anyway, that we've done a ton of organizing and public communication and public education about how terrible this bill is. And then it flows right into, sort of plan B in our strategy. But plan A is to kill this thing. And in order to execute plan A, we actually have to believe in ourselves and each other, right? We can't just walk around going, oh, there's, the Democrats are so flat-footed, I can't believe it, and they're flooding the zone, and they're just going to win on everything. That's not the way you win a battle. You have to actually believe you can win the battle and believe in your team. Flawed as it is, screwed up as it is, the last election was a total failure for us, but that doesn't mean we always lose. That doesn't mean we can't win this one. And part of it has to do with how much we believe in our ability for a very, very unpopular bill to become well-known and unpopular enough where people say, I'm in a swing district. This seems like a dumb idea for me. And that's what we've got to do. Janet on Facebook. What can be done about the people being taken off the streets, out of their homes, who are legally here? They're just rounding up anyone not caring who they are or if they have a right to be here. I think this is, I think there's a court aspect of this where we are prevailing. And I just don't want to gloss over that. But I also think physical presence, peaceful physical observation and presence, and educating people as to what their rights are, it's really an important aspect of this. And so, the law enforcement officers are being called to do these law enforcement actions, ICE agents, the Homeland Security investigations folks, the FBI, sometimes the Guard, sometimes local PDs. Like, they're not uniformly, rotten people or something. Like, they're just doing a job. And if they see community pushback, and again, I'm not talking about physically getting in the way of an operation, but if they see community observation, community pushback, if they see, even in Hawaii, we specifically are sort of like, look, we don't operate that way in the state of Hawaii. We're different here. We're kind to each other. You're free to enforce the law, and you're free, frankly, even to enforce the law more vigorously than you think the previous administration did. But there's a way to do this where you're not terrorizing people in schools and synagogues and churches and hospitals. And so my own judgment is that one gap is the nonprofit community, other churches, individual citizens in an organized, thoughtful, legal, peaceful way to observe this stuff and provide some kind of pushback to these actions. Because I think to the extent that these folks think they are not being observed, it's more likely that some, bad behavior occurs. Who do I have winning the NBA Finals? Thank you so much for this question. It's OKC in 5. I don't think it's that close. I wish it were closer because I'm now at the point in the sports year where we're getting into baseball, which is not my favorite thing, and then we got to wait for football. So I always, unless it's my team, which is the Detroit Pistons, which means it's been a long time, I always root for a 7-game finals just so I can watch more basketball. I am really pleased to, and I know like senators always say, everyone is my dear friend. That's a whole thing we do. But this guy is my dear friend. He's one of my favorite people in the United States Senate. I served as the chairman of the Committee on Indian Affairs, which has jurisdiction over the government's relationship with tribes and Native Hawaiians and Alaska Natives. And this person, Ben Ray Lujan, the senator from New Mexico, taught me nearly everything I know about tribal communities, and is just a very sincere human being, a super smart human being, and a person who is all New Mexico all the time. So without further ado, Ben Ray Lujan.
Hey. All right. Oh, hey, everyone. Good to be with you. You can see why Brian is such an incredible leader and so generous. With that incredible compliment that he just shared, I learned from Brian. But to those of you that I don't know, I'm a senator out of New Mexico. My name's Ben Ray Lujan. Grew up on a small farm out that way, little Division II school. I don't know that I fit the mold here in the Senate, but nonetheless, I'm here now, so they have to deal with me. But it's an honor to be with each and every one of you. So thanks again. Miguel, first, Miguel, want to say thank you so much for reaching out here and for posing this question. Looking at the proposed budget, which includes significant cuts to NASA's science program, nearly 47%, according to the Planetary Society's analysis. Now, as you have here clearly, these cuts threaten the continuation of many active missions and could severely impact science and innovation across the country. Now, the question is this: what are you doing to prevent these cuts and protect NASA's science and research funding, which benefits not only the national progress, but also jobs and education in many states? And look, Miguel, you're absolutely correct here in looking at the negative impact to students across the country, research, science, all of the incredible work that's taking place, and that the leader of space exploration, in this case, the United States of America, we've always been in this incredible place. But it's not just a matter of going and traveling to space. It's the science, it's the work, it's the understanding. Now, I could never answer this question like someone, like a colleague of ours, Mark Kelly, who's a United States Senator out of Arizona. As you know, one of the few astronauts who has served in the United States Senate as well. But he and his twin brother served in this space doing incredible scientific missions and things of that nature. But in the end, the negative impact to what this means to just basic science in our school system is something that we should be fighting against and making sure that our colleagues are not ripping money apart. Every step of the process of what our House Republican and Senate Republican colleagues have been doing in this space, when they offer a piece of legislation that they didn't even take a close look at. And look, a bit of a tangent here, but the proof point is, look at what Marjorie Taylor Greene recently said over the weekend. She said that there was a provision that was left out of this thing, a provision that was in this around AI that was going to strip away rules at the local level. And she admittedly said she didn't know it was in there. And if it was still in the bill when it comes across, she's going to vote against it. Well, how many of my colleagues understand that they're going after these basic, simple science programs that are going to hurt us across the country? I, like Brian Schatz and Cory Booker and all of my Democratic colleagues, we're doing everything we can right now to slow this down, to call out the nonsense, to call BS everywhere that it exists, and force votes to save these programs. So this is something that we'll continue to work on together. But thanks for reaching out. Thanks for what you said. Katie, thank you so much. Katie from Instagram is asking, quote, will the food distribution program on Indian reservations be impacted because of this bill? Katie, the answer is yes. This is going to destroy the access to food across all of America, but especially on sovereign nations. Think about the importance of school food programs, lunch programs when you're a student, you're going to school, or Meals on Wheels programs. Think of all of our constituents, our grandmas who may not be able to leave home and they depend on someone with the Meals on Wheels program to deliver that food. That's all in jeopardy. My Republican colleagues thought that they should strip away about $250 billion from the food programs. Well, the bill actually takes away more than $300 billion. It also jeopardizes all of those small grocery stores that we have on so many of our Indian reservations. About 10% of the revenue that goes to grocery stores actually comes from these important nutrition programs. I had a hearing on this today where my Democratic colleagues were there. Senator Booker was there. We had constituents from different parts of the country testify today, but this is one of those areas of concerns that we all have. I'm honored to represent 23 nations in New Mexico. I work with Senator Schatz, who's the highest ranking Democrat on the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs as well. I am terrified as to what this means to just people, friends and neighbors, Native American constituents that live on reservations, if they're going to get that meal, if students are going to get a meal, or if they're going to go to bed hungry. And look, Senator Raphael Warnock, he talked about it this way today. Not only are my Republican colleagues taking away these nutrition programs from working families, they're going to leave kids by taking food out of their plate, if you will, and they're going to stick them with a tab, because all of this just adds to the debt and the deficit as well. It is nonsense what's happening in this space. Such an important question. Thank you so much, Katie. Ted from Instagram, Ted asks, do you think the Republicans are going to bypass the parliamentarian? You know, Ted, I hope they don't, but they proved a week ago that they were willing to tear apart the fabric of these essential rules that exist just to be able to move legislation. Rather than having an up or down vote and letting colleagues show you where they stand, they're using these ridiculous rules, making things up as they go, and doing things that some folks just describe as nuclear, blowing up all of the rules on the Senate floor. And so to this piece of legislation, which is going to add, I don't know, $5 to $7 trillion to our debt, that's the cost of this thing. It's going to take away programs from working families, like nutrition programs. It's going to arguably close rural health clinics, maybe even rural grocery stores, because the revenue's not there. In addition to all of the other nonsense, it's not fiscally responsible at all. And they're going to use gimmicks to try to get it across the finish line. Remember, the House Republicans had a vote at 1 a.m. in a rules committee, like 6 a.m, 7 a.m on the floor, and they did it in the dark of night. I don't know what they're trying to hide, but because of the tactics they're using, it shows you the concern that exists. It's real. Thanks for this important question. Kate, thanks for asking this question from Facebook. You're asking, is there anything else we can do to protect our public lands? We had a small save recently, but the threats and challenges are very much still there. So, Kate, I would say kudos to Martin Heinrich, my colleague from New Mexico, and Gabe Vasquez, United States Representative out of New Mexico. They were the leaders on a piece of legislation that did exactly what you described here with the small save recently. But I would argue that the threats and challenges are very much still there. What my Republican colleagues are proposing, as you know, they're saying the United States should sell all of our public lands. Think about Yellowstone and all of these important places that we protect in the United States. And what my Republican colleagues are saying, sell it all. Take that money, give tax breaks to folks that are making millions of bucks a year and more, and to heck with everyone else. That's the nonsense that's there. I'm very concerned about it. But what you can do, and we can all do, is use our voice, stand up, make sure you're showing up to these town halls. Well, I guess it's Democratic colleagues having town halls, so a few of our Republican colleagues are willing to go before constituents and voters. But if they do show up, be able to talk about this issue, let's stand up and protect our public lands and our way of life. And I'll close with this on that one. My grandfather, Celedon Lujan, he always told me, leave things better than you found them. I mean, why can't we just all work that way when it comes to our lands? And by the way, being able to breathe clean air, drink clean water, those are all things that we should be willing to fight for and stand up for together. So thanks for the question. Emma's asking from Instagram, what happens if the education department closes, and what happens to special needs students? Emma, such an important question. I would add, it's not just the closure of the Department of Education that would hurt special needs students. Think about programs in Medicaid, nutrition programs, stable support systems for all of these families across the country that will also hurt special needs families. But many of the rules that were put in place when the Department of Education was established was because of the treatment of people. In this case, people that had special needs, friends and neighbors, constituents that were being mistreated. Think about civil rights. I mean, think about what it means to be able to protect access to education. That's why the Department of Education came into existence. And it's why we see so many of my Republican colleagues just going after these programs as well. There's no secret here. It's blatant. It's right in front of us. It's nonsense. And so I'm very concerned what would happen to all of my constituents, family members who have special needs that are attending school today if the United States Department of Education closes. And by the way, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, he actually tried to do this with an executive order. Fortunately, the courts told him you couldn't do it, but they've not stopped there, and they're still trying to do everything they can to dismantle it. Big concern, such an important question. Thanks for asking it. Josh, thank you so much for reaching out to, man. Josh from Facebook said, quote, "I'm concerned how this bill will affect family farmers. What should we know and speak out against on this?" Josh, I don't know where to begin, man, but this is such an important question. So I'm one of the United States senators that grew up on a small farm. I still live on a small farm. Now, our farm was self-sustenance. You know, it was the gardens that we had. We shared it with my neighbors who were my aunts and my uncles. The family took care of the garden. You know, we raised chili like we all do in New Mexico, tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce, onions, garlic, staples. You know, a few fruit trees out there with apricots, cherries, and apples as well. We raised sheep. We had chickens. My brother had a horse. He claimed that he rode that horse. I don't think he did when he was young, but he's pretty good now that he's older. And we even had a few cows on that, but it was for the families. You know, we grew up with not much money in the bank, but we always had a meal. We didn't know we were poor growing up because we always had something to eat. This piece of legislation, though, hurts farmers in so many ways. Number one, you already know that farmers are getting hurt across the country because of President Trump's national sales tax, right? These things that he calls a tariff. Food input costs are going through the roof. It's making it harder and harder. Now, the other area that farmers are getting hit is because Republicans chose to go after these nutrition programs. So think about all the food banks across the country, schools where local farmers were able to sell their local produce to the schools to serve with school lunches and things of that nature. All of that is being devastated. In addition to that, $300 million grab at this program puts the concern that I shared earlier about closing rural grocery stores in jeopardy. That's real. When all that adds up, it points directly to these small farmers. In addition to that, if times get tough and something goes wrong with the budget or the crop goes south and you need to get healthcare and it might be Medicaid that you depend on, well, what happens if that goes away? What happens if we get into tough times, like life happens to every one of us, and all of a sudden you need to go to that food bank, or you have a child who is going to be going to school and is going to depend on that school program for lunch as well. That goes away. All that adds up, and I would argue it points right back to small farmers across the country. We should be very concerned about this, and every small farmer across the country that's getting hit with those tariffs or had a contract pulled because you were working with a food bank or a local school, show up and use your voice and show exactly how it's hurting you, show exactly how it's hurting the family, how it's hurting the local economy. Use your voice and speak up. And by the way, if you are a farmer, thanks for being out there and putting in that hard work. I know it's not easy, but we appreciate you. Thanks for what you do. Kim from Instagram. Kim says, can you talk about what kinds of things Congress can deploy if Trump keeps on defying the courts? Well, look, in this particular area, the courts are one of the areas in the short term that we can stand up to this president. And we've already seen court decision after court decision tell Donald Trump, you can't do what you're doing with these executive orders or going after these programs, things of that nature. The courts are going to matter. Now, the question is, what happens next if Donald Trump continues to go against the courts and ignore the courts? Well, we need the Supreme Court to stand strong and hold him accountable. We also need to work with our colleagues from across the country in the House and in the Senate and say, look, we have checks and balances in America. Don't take my word for it. Look at the United States Constitution. Look at what our founders had and what we should be following in the United States. And if you're not going to speak up and stand up to any president that's going to ignore the courts and ignore the three branches of government, we've got to do something strong here. So using our voices, showing up, standing up, continuing to engage in these courts. Recently, I've personally filed some amicus briefs into some of these court cases, not only before other federal courts, but before the United States Supreme Court as well. We all have a role here. We all have a responsibility. And there's more that we can all do. Any other questions? Josie. Josie from Instagram. Can you tell us what will actually happen from exploding the deficit to pay for these tax cuts? How will a larger deficit affect me and my family? Well, Josie, things get more expensive. What happens when all of that debt gets passed on, or the full faith and credit of the United States gets downgraded or put in jeopardy? Well, credit card interest rates go up, car interest rates go up, mortgage interest rates go up. In addition to what Donald Trump is already doing with his national sales tax and these tariffs, we already see the cost of goods going up, the cost of phones going up, the cost of everything that you use, diapers, strollers for babies, for little kids, going up. And I mean, the kicker here is that my Republican colleagues keep saying that they're doing all of this stuff, all of this devastation to programs like Medicaid or nutrition programs for working families because it's fiscally responsible. Well, how is it fiscally responsible when you're devastating these programs, you're making things more expensive for everyday working families across America, you're going to give away tax breaks to people making millions of bucks a year. And look, people that are doing well, I want them to do well. I want them to continue to grow wealth. I'm just saying they don't need a tax break. Let's put the tax breaks to working families, to folks that are making less than millions of dollars a year. That's where the money should go. But in the same way that my colleague from Georgia said that Republicans, by going after these nutrition programs, are taking foods out of the mouths of kids, they're going to stick them with the tap. So now all of this future debt, these annual deficits, all of that it gets passed on to someone and things get more expensive. So, we need to call out a lie when it's a lie. This is a lie. And like my grandfather would tell me growing up, the cover up is worse than the lie. My Republican colleagues have been lying to the American people by saying they were not going to touch Medicaid, they weren't going to cut Medicare, they were not going to go after nutrition programs, and they were not going to add to the debt. They lied about all of it. It is happening. Sean, you ask an important question here that's connected to the last one. How much will this add to the deficit? Is it true it's like $2 trillion? Well, look, the Congressional Budget Office has been coming up with scores as they've been looking at these changing pieces of legislation. It's at least $2 trillion that will be added. The cost of this bill is being measured between $4 and up towards $7 trillion, depending on who you talk to. And the numbers that I've been using recently are the analysis that have come out of the Wharton School. And the reason I've been using that is because that's where President Donald Trump went to school. So I figured, well, if he went to school there, let's use the numbers that they've come up with. So a cost of about $5 trillion. It's not all paid for. And by the way, here's one of the things to watch. A gimmick that was used by Senate Republicans, I don't know, maybe a month ago, when they were looking at the cost of the House bill, which was scored between, like I said, $4 and $7 trillion at the time, adding at least $2 trillion to the debt. My Republican colleagues had the audacity to say, well, they're going to come up with something called baseline policy. And it doesn't cost anything anymore because it's existing policy. Well, the Congressional Budget Office came out a couple of weeks later and said, no, this is costing trillions of dollars. Again, the cover up is worse than the lie. This is such an important question. And watch Senate Republicans as they try to tell the American people these bills don't cost any money. All they're doing is lying to them. Hey, Robin, thanks for putting us on there from Facebook. Robin is saying, sorry for the simple question. There's no such thing as a simple question. They're all important questions as well. But you said, but can you explain what a reconciliation bill is and how long will it affect us if passed? So look, reconciliation bills are gimmicks, if you will, tools that are used to bypass all the voting thresholds and all the rest to be able to move a piece of legislation to the President of the United States. That's all that it is. It's a fancy title. This just allows pieces of legislation to move through the United States Senate without requiring a 60-vote threshold. The negative impacts, though, if Republicans push through this bill, that will be the largest elimination of nutrition programs in America. the largest elimination of access to healthcare when it comes to Medicaid programs across the country, which will close rural health clinics, the elimination of those nutrition programs, which will close rural grocery stores, and then all of the other bad things that are in this package. I don't know if I will see this get fixed in a lifetime. It'll be devastating what they do, because think about it this way. If mental health programs that are dependent on Medicaid get destroyed, think of all the mental health providers across the country that are going to lose their jobs, get fired, or move on. So they'll go away. Well, if a patient has a relationship with the mental health provider, it's built on trust of working together. Well, what happens if that goes away? How long is it going to take for that patient to have a trustworthy relationship with someone to get care from again? I think it's endless. I'm very worried about what this means to all these programs across the country, but it's such an important question. And I just want to thank you all for giving me a chance to visit with you. I've had the honor of serving with several colleagues throughout the United States. And I'm one of the more junior members. I recently joined the Senate in 2021. But there's a lot of incredible leaders, young leaders, leaders that care about people, that are compassionate, that are doers, that stand by their word, care about constituents, and get things going. And you're going to hear from one next. And that's one of the newest members to our body, but she's not new to America. She's not new to the people of Maryland. And that's Angela Alsobrooks. Angela, come on over. We'll turn the floor over to you. Yeah. Thanks for having me, everyone.
Well, good evening, everyone. You know, Senator Lujan just said a couple of things. He said that I was new to the Senate. He said they are caring people. He also described me as young. Now, the young part I cannot attest to. I am solidly middle-aged, but I can attest to the fact that I care deeply about Marylanders and about the American people, and that we're going to work so hard to ensure that every family has what it needs. And the question is whether it's true that people will lose SNAP and Medicare and what will happen. And you know what? Sadly, it is true. And I think the biggest question we have to ask ourselves is why? You know, based on what we've seen so far, we're anticipating just in my state alone that when we think not Medicare, but think about Medicaid, we have about 1.3 million people who will lose their insurance, their health insurance. We also have about 130,000 people who will lose supplemental nutrition benefits. And I think it's important to say it that way to make sure that we don't gloss over what this really means. When we talk about 130,000, those are not just numbers, those are lives. And when you say what will happen is that our families will have to make really, really difficult choices. The families who will not be able to afford food. You know, there's a mother that I can think about who is in school. She's working to improve her life for herself and for her children. And she told our staff and told us that, you know what, she relies very heavily on those supplemental nutrition dollars to help feed herself and feed her children. And she's going to have to make a different choice. So SNAP is important. And SNAP is important. You know why? Because having something to eat is a fundamental need. We're not talking about things that are frivolous privileges. Where have we come as Americans when we no longer understand that it should be a basic human right of every single human being to have access to nutrition for themselves and for their families? These are basic needs. And it is so important to ensure that our seniors, many of whom depend on SNAP in order to be able to eat. Again, we have young families who are working hard to make ends meet, and many of them and their children are relying on these SNAP dollars. So if we talk about it, it is the most vulnerable among us are the people who we are now looking to take away these benefits. And again, asking the important question, why? Why? So that rich people can become richer. That's literally what this is about. So that the top 1% become richer and the bottom 10% become poorer. It is a gross redistribution of wealth but just to have tax cuts for rich people, and that's the reason that we would deprive a senior of nutrition they need, or a young family and children of the nutrition they need. It's horrible. It is unconscionable. And you know, the question's advice on how to talk to Republicans who oppose Medicaid cuts, but support work reporting requirements, which would cut millions who work or are exempt. You know, I think the thing for us to remember as we talk to Republicans, Democrats, and people who didn't vote at all, is if we talk to each other on a basic level as humans, what we know is that, you know, when we, all of us, again, every single part of our families deserve to have health care when they are sick. And when we think again about Medicaid, let's talk about who we're talking about. To talk about children who have disabilities. You know, I had the opportunity last week to visit a really beautiful school that does great work with children who have developmental delays. Many of their families are concerned. I met with their parents who said, you know, this has been a lifesaver for our family to be able to have the support we need for our child who has developmental disabilities, and we don't know what we will do. When we think about the seniors, you know, but for the grace of God, none of us know whether or not we might end up in a nursing home. Those are the individuals that we're talking about who depend on Medicaid. And you know what? When we talk about work reporting requirements, I understand the concern that we want to make sure that these benefits go to the people who need them most. That's a conversation that we can have. But whether or not we should cut benefits to the most vulnerable among us to enrich rich people is something that I think Republicans, Democrats, independents, and people who don't vote at all can agree on. Is just morally wrong. If we pay for the programs, why can't we say where our money goes? You know, and fair enough. If we pay for the programs, we can absolutely say where our money goes. And I think I'm hearing pretty loud and clear that most people in our country believe that people who are disabled, people who are elderly, and children deserve to have health care. And so I think that we are hearing people say that they really do want to save these benefits. And you know what? It's not just people who are in a blue state. I'm also hearing that people who are in red areas feel the same way. And so no one is saying that we can't say where our money goes. But I think that we as a country ought to have a baseline of our values say that we certainly believe that the most vulnerable among us deserve to have nutrition and deserve to have health care. And I believe that it's already being said across the country that people do support these benefits and do not agree with cutting those benefits to benefit tax cuts for billionaires. Hi, Senator. I have hopefully a fun question. Are you doing anything to celebrate Pride? I absolutely am. I'll be in Baltimore. There's a wonderful Pride celebration that is happening in Baltimore, and I am looking forward to attending that celebration. Can you talk about what makes you angry about this bill? Oh my goodness, let me count the ways. I am angry about the big fat lie. And the big fat lie that I am angry about says that the cuts that we are seeing, the cuts to Medicaid, the cuts to SNAP, the cuts that would harm firefighters who need to have certain protective care so that they are not getting cancer, all of these cuts, the big lie is that all of this is because of waste, fraud, and abuse. And that we are somehow doing something to cause to help fix the deficit. And what we know as a matter of fact is that the proposal that we have seen actually explodes the deficit and makes it grow. And we also know that this is not about waste, fraud, or abuse in terms of the the cuts that we're seeing, we know that the fact of the matter is it's all being done to benefit billionaires, to make sure that they have the tax cuts that they would need. And I resent anyone saying that we should, on the backs of elderly people and children who need these supplemental nutrition dollars, or for those who need a little help to make sure that their loved one can stay in a nursing facility or to have the benefits they need, that somehow this is what's exploding the deficit. It's just not true. So how do we stop this? Really, only 4 votes? You know what? I encourage all of those who are watching right now to talk to your friends, to talk to your neighbors, to talk to your family members who have relationships. You know, I think it's important that we not just talk to Democrats. I think we ought to talk to our friends in the Republican Party and to talk to them also, and to explain much of what we're facing here. Again, we talk about people losing their health care, talk about the people who are losing the nutrition they need. And I think that we will find that when we really talk to the people who are in our lives, many of them will agree with us that this is not the right approach to cut in this way, to really help the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And I think it is possible to answer the question. So I want to just thank everyone who has tuned in. I'm just so grateful for your engagement. You know, we really are all in this together. At the end of the day, I'm always reminded, you know, I'm the daughter of a receptionist and a car salesman. And I'm reminded every single day that no matter where you are, where you live, or what your circumstances are, we all want the same things for our families. We want our children to have the very best that we can offer them, to have safe and affordable places to live. We believe that in America, every child should have health care. We believe in America that when you have worked and done all of the things that are required and you need a little help, you're somewhere in assisted living, that you should be able to have that assistance, that we want our families who need a little help to eat. We want to make sure that that happens. And I believe that we all want the same things for our families. So just thank you so much for tuning in and for engaging. And I can't wait to continue this conversation. Thank you so much, everyone. God bless you. Thank you.